Hello, piano geeks and enthusiasts. My name is Elmer.
My name is Mark.
And we are Marc and Elmer's
PSI.
PSI, Piano Scene Investigations.
How you doing?
Yeah. Excuse me, folks, but just a little bit under the weather. My allergies been acting up. Doing a lot of house cleaning. Yeah. It's been a long-term project. I've been putting away books, scores, CDs. Today, let's see, was it yesterday? Yeah, yesterday I finally got to the worst part of the room. It was the closet. Oh, how bad is it? It is so bad. It was so dusty in there, and you couldn't help but inhale some of the dust that's in there. It's really musty. The wife told me, "Why don't you wear your mask?" And I was like, I told you should have worn your mask. So,
she's a nurse, too.
Yeah, she's a nurse.
She knows what she's talking about.
Yeah, she knows my MO. I just dive in and, as you say, the dumpster diver.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. But the upside is I did find some stuff that I hadn't seen in a really long time. A lot of stuff. I found some magazines.
Ooh.
Something that we'll definitely visit sometime. Some of them very historical, like the Etude. And I found another one called, let's see, a magazine called Listen.
I've never heard of that one.
Neither have I, but it's a very fancy looking magazine.
Etude magazine was at one time really super popular. It was a really oversized, big magazine that was published from the late 19th into the earlier 20th century. Probably lasted about 30 years anyway, I think. And the really remarkable thing about it is with the influx of all these extraordinary European pianists, there are especially Leopold Godowsky, as an educator, contributed, I would say, kind of regularly by introducing one of his pieces, not the wild, crazy things, but more accessible kind of music, but still nice music. And he'd always have a how to learn it page or two about how to study it and prepare it, and what the voices all meant and things like that. They were really great. It was a compendium of anything to do with piano in the United States at the time. There were advertisements. It's really cool to look at the old advertisements at the back for all the schools. Big name. Juilliard wasn't even started yet when they were going. Curtis is older. But there were some other schools in New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia. And then farther afield, sometimes you see things from Chicago and Cincinnati and places. And then a lot of schools, nowadays, what is it? The way, there's like, what do you call it? The salon schools around the United States. People learn how to do hair and nails and things like that. Piano schools used to be like that. They were everywhere. Everybody was studying the piano. And advertisements from all the piano makers and things. Yeah. If you ever see any copies of it, it's from a historical point of view, and it's really, we're piano geeks, buffs,
enthusiasts,
and we're really interested in historical stuff. Yeah. And it's actually, I find, very pleasant reading. And because, the articles are written by people who knew their stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And
these are not just, these are not just like Time magazine size articles. These articles were like, they reached, these pages are literally like this. And they covered with font that small.
Yeah, I think that magazine was probably maybe 11 by 14 or something. But in the old days, magazines were big like that.
Oh, yeah.
Sheet music was big like that.
Yeah,
it was. There were a lot more trees to cut down back in those days.
So, anyways, do you want to go first, or?
Well, since you started,
okay. All right. This is what
I have a few things that I wanted to share too.
Okay. Well, I remember maybe our first year together, I had always talked about how we could improve the popularity of classical music and classical musicians, composers, and things. And I always felt that why don't we do what other sports and things do? When I always thought that why not have baseball card, football card versions in the classical music world? Guess what I found?
No way, really?
Yeah, check it out.
Great composers' knowledge cards from the Library of Congress. Wow.
Yeah.
Can I open it?
Oh, absolutely. It's been opened already.
But they haven't been used much.
They have not been used. Well,
like
I said, I found them in
First
the
guy on the top is one of his favorite composers,
Mendelssohn. Yes.
Oh, who's this? Carl Orff.
Yeah.
My gosh. Well, these are great photographs. Bernard Herrmann. There's Charles Ives. Oh, that lady, is that? Oh, Elisabeth Jacquet de la Guerre. She's a French composer from the later 18th century. 17th century. In fact, I have harpsichord recordings with her. This is Henry Cowell, Debussy. These are wonderful. The box. Here, show them like this picture.
Show them what picture? Oh, that.
Here's Debussy in a home in front of a fireplace and a mantle.
Yeah, check out these pictures.
Hold up close and see it.
See? That's a picture of Debussy. And on the back of the card, there's a little bio and some info about the composer themselves.
Wow, I suppose you could, maybe if they reprint these things, you could create a game like, what's that Japanese game?
Pokemon.
You can have battles with each other.
Yeah.
I'll put my Stravinsky and my Debussy and my Poulenc up against your Beethoven. Of course, Beethoven's going to win.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing against those guys, but
yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, so I thought that was pretty fun. Yeah, I could always use a brush up, on a number of these composers.
Yeah.
So, and if that wasn't enough,
interesting too. Does it say when they were published?
These were published back in.
Doesn't say.
Doesn't say.
Yeah.
Printed in Hong Kong. So, but anyways, if that weren't enough, I also found playing cards.
Where do you find this stuff?
I don't know. I don't even remember having this stuff.
This is published by Alfred, which is pretty much my favorite pedagogical series, but it's classical composers playing cards.
Yeah.
Real thing. Each card contains composer's information, the image, nationality, birth, death dates, cities of birth and death, and short facts about them and their compositions. Very cool. You could learn something about classical music with your poker buddies.
Oh yeah, the only problem with them, if they know you have the Chopin, they'll know what card. So yeah, the regular playing cards, I guess, sort of.
No, it says they are.
Yeah, see,
it's got the
Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. Anybody have it with Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach? They'll know they have the 10 of diamonds. See?
I wonder how they did it. See, there you go. That says something. So I wonder who the Royal Suit composers are.
Ooh, should we find out?
Find the king. Who's the king?
Find the king.
Bach is the king. I'll bet you Bach is the
Okay,
king.
well, let's find out. That'd be interesting. I'd like to know. Okay, so
Oh, they look like they're still in order. You play with it.
okay, the King of Hearts was given to Giacomo Puccini.
Whoa! So they have different kings, perhaps.
Yeah, the Queen
Of hearts.
Queen of Hearts is
Yeah.
Clara Schumann.
They used a woman actually.
Yeah,
So the queen is always a female composer?
I don't know. We'll find out here. Let's see. Looking. Oh, the King of Diamonds was given to Mozart.
Wait!
Mozart got King of Diamonds. Oh, Queen of Diamonds. Oh, I do not know this person. Isabella Colbrand Rossini.
Maybe she's Rossini's wife?
I don't know. It says here, wife of Rossini. You're right.
Go.
She was a coloratura soprano, opera diva. She herself was born in 1785, Madrid, Spain. Died in Bologna, Italy.
Bologna, yeah. What year did she die, does it say?
She died in 1845.
Oh, she lived longer than him. I think Rossini died in the 20s.
Oh. Guess who got the Ace of Spades? Ace of Spades was given to Palestrina.
Wow. Probably one of the best motet writers.
Yeah. All right. Check it out. Queen of Spades was given to Francesca Caccini.
Ah, that's been Caccini's wife.
Could be. Yeah. Well, does not say.
Ah.
It says here, singer, harpsichordist, composer of songs, opera, and chamber music. Let's see. It says here, generally recognized as the first opera by a woman.
Wow.
I guess what is it? That's a long title.
This is a little farther back in the early opera period, but wasn't there also a male composer named Caccini?
Oh yeah, there was. He was a string player.
Ah.
Okay, as we move on. Oh! Jack of Diamonds. Haydn. Franz Joseph Haydn.
Yes, Jack of all trades.
Yeah.
Mr. Haydn could do it all.
Oh. Jack of Spades. Orlando de la Seuss.
De la Seuss?
De la Seuss.
Huh.
Moving. Jack of...
Can't see it.
What chord is that? Is it clubs?
Oh, clubs, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, Henry Purcell.
Yes, Henry Purcell, Jack of Clubs. Ace of Diamonds was given to Beethoven.
Hey! Classicist. So Haydn's the Jack, Mozart was the king, and Beethoven's the ace.
Yeah.
Of diamonds.
Queen of Clubs was given to Elizabeth Claude Jacquet de la Guerre.
Yeah, the French harpsichordist.
Yeah.
She wrote some good music. When I was at the Boston Early Music Festival, there's oodles of people purveying all kinds of things, and I bought some nice recordings back in the days. I think when I was there that time, they're still selling albums. They're actually LPs that I have. I don't remember the guy's name, but a fabulous harpsichordist, American, and it's an entire album of Elizabeth Jacquet's music.
Wow. Well, this is a shock. Ace of Clubs was given to J.S. Bach.
Really?
Yeah, that's what it says. King of Spades, Monteverdi.
Ooh, one of my favorite composers. One of my favorite operas ever, Orfeo.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful opera. Especially when it's truly performed with the original instruments and everything. And it's a wonderful story. When the poor guy goes back into hell to get Eurydice, and she doesn't make it all the way out.
Yeah. Well, the king of clubs was given to George Frederick Handel.
Mm-hmm. Bach and Handel right next to each other.
Yes. 10 of spades was Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. There you have it. There you have it. But that's an interesting concept, though. Trying to contribute king of spade, king of hearts, king of clubs.
There must have been some kind of knowledge and bias towards people.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see some of the lesser cards and see who got assigned to them.
Yeah. Now, here's a movie I have been looking for. I've been wanting to watch this movie for the longest time, and I knew I had a copy of it someplace. And some of you will probably most of you will remember it. I had it on DVD someplace, and it is the director's cut of Amadeus.
Ooh, the director's cut.
Director's cut.
Ooh,
yes.
That could be interesting.
Yeah, much different from the theatrical release.
You know the guys. Oh, the story, guys, is from the 19th century, and Rimsky-Korsakov is the one that wrote an opera that was about this version of Mozart and Salieri.
Really?
I don't think he called it Amadeus, but there was this idea that, well, Mozart himself, in a book, I won't get it right now, but there's a small book written by an English barrister, probably about, what is this, at least 40 years ago. He was, English, classical enthusiast, and he put his legal chops together to try to answer what really happened to Mozart. What really was going on there? Why did he die? Because the stories that were told about him weren't entirely true. He was paid extremely well. Yeah. I mean, he was doing fine when he was in the electors. Was that the guy's title up in Salzburg? But he pissed him off, and he wanted his freedom. And then he went to Vienna, and he actually did quite well financially. Some of the operas that he wrote, he got paid some good money. Those records, all that stuff is mostly available historically. And then there was always this question as to what's this deal about why he got buried in an anonymous pauper's grave outside the wall of Vienna. And he looks at some conversation books of Beethoven's and his secretary, forget his name. But then he also puts together stuff, and it's a really good story because it begins like a BBC mystery theater kind of show, where it's the day after Christmas, Boxing Day, I think they call it, in Vienna, in the not the empirical apartments, where a lot of people who work for the court, they live with their families. It's part of their pay. They get paid, they get housing, and so forth. And they're close by when needed for things. And the story begins in the book with a baby crying all night long. Baby's crying all night. Well, there was some arguing before between the husband and the wife, and the people are unfortunately kind of used to that, Big, huge rooms, 10-foot probably ceilings, 12-foot, who knows. Big, ornate, wonderful rooms, but not the best insulation. I mean, that was yet to come years later. But so people kind of heard things. And there was a huge fight, but they were accustomed to this in that apartment. This guy was they call him like in England, the exchequer. I mean, he was in the business of handling the emperor's money, finances. That was his job. And finally, the baby keeps crying, and people are concerned because nobody seems to be able to stop the baby, and nobody inside the apartment is stopping the baby. And so they actually break into the apartment, and they find both husband and wife dead. She had been stabbed many times and slashed in the face, and then he had killed himself. And the baby was left behind. And this guy was friends of Mozart. Mozart was dead now since the beginning of the month. Mozart died, the 9th of December or something? Something like that. And what he begins to put together was that, Mozart, he was, what they say in the movie is known to be pretty true. He was quite a philanderer. He was a brilliant, spoiled little brat kid, from early on. Yeah, and the interesting thing that he begins to show is he finds that there was correspondence, friendly correspondence between Mozart and this guy. Mozart had at times been asking this guy for money. Now, he didn't embezzle or anything, it was his own money.
Right.
But he loaned Mozart money at different times, and Mozart had a certain debt to the guy. I'm not giving anything away because the book and all the details and the things around it's not a big book. It's not too big. And it's a very good read, Mozart and Costanza. But what he comes up with is that Mozart, with his various lady friends, is infamous for betting the sopranos and the operas and all that.
Wow.
That was Mozart. The money that he presumably had been borrowing to meet with a secret lady for trysts at the baths, the famous places where they go to vacation and things. He wasn't using his own money, he was using the money that he borrowed from his friend to have an affair with his friend's wife.
Ooh.
And after Mozart died, this guy found out, presumably, because one of the things they said is that this guy was a criminal lawyer in England, and he said the slashing the face, when the guys do that to the women, historically, it was out of jealousy because of, what do you call it when they cheat on each other?
Yeah, adultery.
Adultery. And he'd seen that many times in his career, and he thought, well, that's what happened here. And he started to put two and two together. Now, I don't know if there's sufficient 100% evidence to prove it, but he's going on his experience and on quite a bit of stuff that he found, including the signatures that were given in the guest registries at the places where Mozart met. And he does know that historically the woman was on vacation alone from her husband, and Mozart was also gone from Vienna at the same time.
Wow.
So he starts pulling a case together. And he also, there's something I'll never forget, Mozart, in the last year of his life or so, because Costanza talked about this after he died to his student who helped finish the Mass and things, and I think then he married Costanza eventually.
Oh.
Mozart's student did. That they were taking the baby for a stroll on the Prater, which is the big ring around central Royal Vienna. And Mozart said to Costanza, he says, I think I'm being poisoned. She said, how do you know this? It's just because of the certain ways I feel. And she said, well, how are they doing it? He says, I think it's aquavit. Aquavit, which literally means the water of life,
Oh, jeez.
was known to have been used at least back in the Roman times as a way of killing off people, It's flavorless, odorless, tasteless, looks like water. You could add it to wine or beer or anything like that, any liquid. You could add it to, and they would drink it. And it's, I don't know if it's based on arsenic or not, but of course it's a poison which basically dries out the insides, and, it's kind of like, I suppose, like rat poison or something, but yeah, it destroys the organs. And so his whole thing is he gets to the idea that Mozart died very much prematurely and unnecessarily because he wasn't dirt poor. And then the reason that he was buried in the pauper's grave and not buried in a Catholic grave inside the city, in a Catholic cemetery, is mostly due to Beethoven's speaking in his conversation books with, what was his name? Schindler, right?
Schindler.
Wasn't that the secretary's name?
Or Sismiller?
No, the Süssmayr was Mozart's student.
Okay.
I think, was it Anton Schindler? I think. He was one of the important long-term serving secretaries. And Beethoven talked about the awful thing that they did to Mozart and how he couldn't be buried in sacred ground. He doesn't actually say the details of why, but because they all knew. Well, what did they know? Well, presumably Mozart's philandering, people knew about that. But presumably, as you know, court gossip talking and all this is, people knew behind the guy's back that his wife was having an affair with Mozart. And because when he found out and killed him, but that was after Mozart was buried. No, it was just that there were sufficient people, all Catholics, in the court who knew this sufficiently, including the clergy, that they wouldn't approve Mozart's burial in a Catholic grave. And that's why he was tossed outside with the paupers.
Wow.
And Beethoven was incensed by that. He thought, this is one of the most genius people in his mind. I think he knew J.S. Bach somewhat, but he didn't have the reputation that he has with us now until the 19th century, mostly thanks to Mendelssohn and people like that. But the big Bach in their day was C.P.E. Bach, who they held in great esteem, actually. Haydn and Beethoven both thought he was wonderful. But Beethoven also thought Mozart was extraordinary, This genius man who gave the world so much amazing music was tossed into a pauper's grave, mostly because the high-class people wouldn't let him be buried in sacred ground because they all knew what had happened. But it's a very good book, Mozart Costanza. But I saw the theatrical production of this before it became a movie with Frank Langella.
Oh, yeah.
Salieri and Tom Hulce? Tom Hulce was the Broadway actor as well. Tom Hulce was a graduate of the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire, I think. He was a theatrical graduate of the school up in Eau Claire.
Wow.
Yeah. I got my master's in Madison, so all of Wisconsin was proud of him because this is one of our guys. And he got to play Mozart,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. That would be cool to see because it's the director's cut.
Yes, it is.
You know how I have to have a popcorn night and watch it.
Oh, absolutely. The movie came out in 1984.
Yeah. This is well worth watching. It's fabulously done. It's all recorded in Europe. Wonderful costumes. I mean, everything. And I think they won some awards.
Oh, yeah, they did.
For some of this stuff.
Best Picture. Oh, wait. Yeah, winner of 8 Academy. Winner.
Right.
Of 8 Academy Awards, including Best Picture.
It was a huge deal. And now it's not Frank Langella. It's F. Murray Abraham.
F. Murray Abraham.
Plays Salieri.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful story and the characters. And once you've heard this, you'll hear a certain kind of maniacal laugh that Tom Hulce does as Mozart.
Yeah.
You'll never forget that.
Oh, you'll never forget it. Yeah, I was in my sophomore year in college when this came out. And it was a rough time. I was still trying to get used to college life. All those hours practicing.
You and your motorcycle boots and your big belt.
Yeah. Well, that's another story. So, but no, I had to do away with I couldn't bring the motorcycle.
And I love director's cuts because that, as you guys well know, is the director's original vision for his creation.
Yeah.
That was it. It's like I've got 2 versions, I think, of the Tolkien movies.
The 2
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
I have one that was released, at some point on DVD after the movies were up in the theaters and everything. But then later on, Peter Jackson came out with his cut. Man, because the thing that's interesting, the earlier films, there's stuff, I think critical stuff that has you like, well, why did they have that relationship? Or what the hell happened that, this guy fell out of favor and all this kind of stuff? Well, the restored versions that are the original intention of Peter Jackson answer all the questions.
Wow.
But they're like Wagner operas. It's like what's the last of the trilogy? The big huge battle. There's the Twin Towers and then something. But the very last
Return of the King?
Return of the King, I think, is like 5 hours long.
Oh, gosh.
It's truly like a Wagner opera. And I think they even have intermissions in them. Like there's 2 intermissions.
Wow, I did
People to get up and go potty.
Grab snacks. Now, in this movie, let's get down to it. Who are the pianists who play in this movie?
Ooh.
Let's see if you recognize these names.
Forte piano.
I'm sorry?
Forte piano.
Forte piano, yeah. Well, let's see if you recognize the names. The first name that came up on the cast and crew. Have you heard of this Anne Klafelic?
I don't know.
I don't know her either.
No.
But it's spelled her first name Anne, last name Queffelec, Quefffelec.
No idea.
Sounds French.
Mm-hmm.
The next name, you'll know this one, Ivan Morovitz.
I know Ivan Morovitz. Ivan
Morovitz.
Yeah.
Okay, Ivan Morovitz.
Mm-hmm.
And the last name here, we should all know this one, Emmanuel Axe.
Really?
Yeah.
Are they playing? But they always have forte piano in that film, isn't it? It's not real piano sound, is it?
No, I don't think it's a real piano sound. You're right.
Yeah.
It does sound like a.
The other cool thing is that there's a great performance in a great opera, a Baroque opera hall.
Yeah.
In the film, and you get to see it like opera would have been performed in that time. There were no seats on the orchestra floor. People stood and milled about, and of course talked with each other and crap like that. Up in the empirical seat place in the loge, there were seats for the emperor and such like that, and seats in the rings around it, but the floor was empty. Well, it's a real theater that even attracted Richard Wagner to the city of Bayreuth in the 19th century. This was built in the 18th century by the Margrave of Bayreuth, who was the sister of Emperor Frederick the Great in the 18th century, and she married the Margrave, who was the boss man in Bayreuth down there, and she, grown up with her brother's love for classical arts and all the things that he did. He brought C.P. Bach there, and Quantz was there and wrote all that, and he himself was a flutist as well. Well, she built the opera house, and she had a whole lot of cultural things going there, and it's remarkably extant. Of course, it's been maintained and then even fixed up a bit. But I attended some performances in that hall. It's a magnificent little opera, and not so little, but it's not on the size of 19th century ones or 20th century like the Metropolitan or something. But Wagner was interested in it because in the Baroque days, what they were really masters of were mechanical stage sets, so that the people were on a boat and there were waves and things like that, or various made to look realistic kind of backgrounds or foregrounds or things. Those they had magnificent creations, but they took a lot of space because there was a lot in the mechanisms to make them work. Some guys were back there turning cranks and stuff to make things move and stuff, and so they had to have a place to put these things, and they were on wheels. So there was the curtain which would fall, and then there's a back curtain for the background, and then it goes way, way back. There's very deep backstage for all of that stuff, and that's one of the things that Wagner was looking for, because he also created operas that had a lot of stuff like that, and he needed space for it. But then when he finally looked it over, he decided, it's still too small, and it's way too Baroque out in the front part. I mean, it's beautiful. And they've used the same theater as well for the movie Farinelli.
Oh, wow.
So then Wagner eventually thought, so up on the Green Hill, the Grüne Hügel, is where he built his famous opera house. And it's really interesting because when you see the front part of Bayreuth, which is actually the part where the people mill about and stuff before you get into the theater, there's a huge building that's even taller behind the actual whole stage unit of the places where they have the backstage stuff, because he knew he needed that kind of space. But it's interesting that there were two reasons why he went there. One is that Bayreuth, in pretty much Germany proper, was considered almost kind of like the center of Germany. It was in the center. So anybody could come from any direction about the same distance to travel to it. And that he was looking specifically at that opera house. And then it proved insufficient, and so he raised funds. This is why at the latter part of Wagner's life, for a period of time, until they really got things built, he was going around conducting Beethoven's Ninth Symphony all over Europe to raise money for the opera house. Yeah. And then finally, as it was really taking on, it was really getting, there's movement. Mad King Ludwig II of Bavaria, who had always been a great Wagnerite, and was responsible for Wagner being able to come back into Germany because of his political stuff in Dresden decades before. He built Wagner's home, Waldfried, and then he contributed the rest of the stuff. And the first performance of The Ring that was given in the house was given solely to Ludwig. He sat in the very middle of the theater, completely alone with nobody there, and watched. I think they must have done it like they usually do in 4 days, but put on the whole Ring for Ludwig as a thank you.
Wow.
Gift. So
That's amazing.
I can always provide plenty of background info.
Oh, that's fine. That's great. Now, if this weren't enough, remember, this movie came out in the theaters back in '84, right? 1 year later, took me some time to find this movie. I found this. It's called
Forget Mozart?
Forget Mozart. Now, this is interesting here. It says here in the back, in case you're wondering, this is VHS video cassette. Some of you younger people may not know about this, but there it is. In the back it says Vienna, December 5th, 1791.
5th, not the 8th or the 9th. Yeah.
Friends and associates of Mozart are gathered at his deathbed. Officially, they are in mourning, but the small room is filled with mistrust, fear, and suspicion.
Uh-huh.
The chief of the secret police is present, and Mozart's short life is unrolled in a dramatic hearing. His musical genius, his obstinate love of freedom, his boundless lust of life, and his extreme passions. But Mozart is not only portrayed as a genius, but as a man with ordinary fears, strengths, and weaknesses. His life is a hectic one. He is obsessed by the conviction that he does not have much time to live. Mozart is a fascinating man, but difficult to get along with. He offends his friends, but offers little or no resistance to his enemies and their intrigues.
Oh.
The film's dramatic structure is similar to that of a thriller. Not even the secret police chief's methods of interrogation can answer all the questions. Everyone in the room had a motive and an opportunity to kill Mozart.
Wow.
His death, however, is and remains a mystery.
Who's the director?
Director? It is directed by Salvo Luther.
And who's the writer? Does it say who wrote it?
The writer? Does not say, but I would be curious.
I've never heard of this.
Yes.
Ooh, is that a topless lady there?
Yes.
I take it this was made in Europe.
Yes, it was. It's German. The
Oh.
whole thing is in German
Oh.
with English subtitles.
Yeah, Germans do a lot of topless stuff.
Yes.
Yeah,
Now,
some of you are going to write us and be offended by that, but come on.
yeah.
Any of the opera stuff that you guys are going to in Germany now, it's like, it's not triple X, but some of the stuff is X rated.
Really?
Over here it would be.
Really?
No, my German brother,
Yeah.
spiritual brother, Klaus,
Yeah.
who's a stage director, and he did singing as a kind of a buffo tenor. He talked about the kind of shows that they've been putting on. Some pretty amazing stuff.
Well, here's
Wow,
the roster.
So I have to watch that at his house because he has a VHS.
Yes. So the roster here, we don't have a Tom Hulse in this movie. We have instead the actor Max Tidorf, Tidof, who plays Mozart. Costanzi is played by Katarina Racke, Raacke. But the headliner in this cast is Armin Mueller-Stahl.
I know who that is.
Yes, he plays Graf Pergen. He is the investigator in this movie.
This guy, you would recognize him if you saw him. Although this was made a while back, I imagine.
Yes.
If you could see him as an older man, you'd recognize him in a number of even English language films that he's acted in. either English productions or American productions.
Yeah.
It's been in some things. I can't remember exactly, but
well,
I can see his face and I know who he is. Yeah.
Yeah, he played in the movie Shine. He played the father of David Helfgott in that movie. So, but anyways, Groff Pergan, and I tell you, he plays the investigator in this movie. He's the chief of police, and he's asking questions to everyone that was in the room, and he visits places. I saw this movie a long, long time ago. It's been years.
When you're talking about something else, I have a little time. I'm going to look that up.
Okay.
Because I'm wondering if he's a real historical figure, if this is all fiction.
Oh, if he is, we could very well say that he is the earliest of PSI agents.
Yeah, cool.
The earliest.
Cool.
So, anyways, yeah, it's an interesting movie. Unlike the movie Amadeus, this is actually a very dark film.
Oh, I can imagine.
It's a very dark film. I mean, even the film they used to make to record the movie is sort of a little bit on the grainy side. I guess they wanted to make it look historical. Whereas if you watch Amadeus, it's bright, it's light, the lighting, everything. Yeah. It's colorful, lots of color.
You're telling me about this?
Yeah.
Years ago, when I was pretty much early married, and my wife and I lived in Yellow Springs, Ohio. Hey, Yellow Springs. It's a very progressive town, has a lot of Quaker history. They're part of the Underground Railroad and things like that. Mm-hmm. Antioch College is there. It's that kind of a town. It's a smallish place in between Xenia, Dayton, Fairborn, and all the way over here in West Columbus, south of Springfield, where I was born. I loved living there when I was there. And we happened to go to, I think it was a farmer's market or something on a Saturday. And there was a guy, an older fellow, had a table set up. And turns out, I won't talk about all the names, but he was, at that time, I think, the scion of this old Quaker family, which has a historic place, their home and everything, in Yellow Springs. Going back to those days when the Quakers were involved seriously in political things like that, because the way they felt about stuff. But he was there mostly to pass out this 25-page hand-typed, but then I think he had somehow back in those days made Xerox copies or something, of his research and an article about the truth about the Kennedy assassination.
Whoa.
This is the first time that I'd ever really read anything that, really loads into the whole Kennedy conspiracy world, about what really happened. And ever since then, this must have been like back in 84, 85, something like that. Ever since then, so over the last 30-some years, I've always been curious about this stuff because I was, my earliest human memory on this planet, I was born in January of 62, and Kennedy was killed in November of 63. So I was a year and 11 months old, so not quite 2. And my mom and I spent our days together. She had this big playpen she put up in the living room, and then she turned on the TV. And she said at the time, she said TV was the best babysitter ever invented. Because I would either look through the bars and watch TV when I was sitting there doing stuff, or I had my milk in my bottle and some toys and a blankie and a pillow and stuff like that. So I could sleep, I could play, I could walk around. It was I was a little guy, so it was a big playpen. And my memory, and I think it's because it was so traumatic for me, because the sofa was over there against the wall, the TV was here, and I was in my playpen. And what I remember mostly was Mom was on the sofa, sobbing, crying so heavily, just boo-hoo and all, really loud. And I'm sure I was, as kids are sensitive, just like, whoa, what is going on? Why is Mom crying like that? And what I remember on the TV was black and white, was unusually nobody was talking. It was just a parade, I didn't know what that was, but there were soldiers walking in formation, and then there was a horse, and then there was the caisson, the wagon pulling the casket. And now, I mean, after the fact, I realized that that was the TV coverage live at the time of President Kennedy's funeral.
Procession.
The procession. And my mom was really sad about that. That's and I was less than 2 years old, but I can see it now, like it happened yesterday. All of it, even the ugly green colored paint on the living room wall and kind of melange kind of carpet that was on the floor and stuff. It's always remained for me as a moment, you know, and I think astonishing that I would remember that far back, and that's what it was. A little bit later, I think I understood what it was all about. But I've learned since that time, Yellow Spring. Subsequently, I have a doctorate. I'm trained academically and all that. But over the years, I've had experiences with various kinds of things. I won't go into all those details now. We'll save that for another podcast that I'm considering doing, which deals with things like this. But I would say I'm a critically minded, scientifically trained academic, but I have had some life experiences, very specific things I've seen, witnessed, and experienced, which defy the explanations that we're usually taught or given for such things. And I've explored those things. And over the years, it's been interesting to me that some things have been labeled conspiracy. Now everybody takes it as fact because enough time has passed that there's been enough information found to turn it from conspiracy into truth or almost near truth.
Yeah.
So over all these years, I've tried to stay abreast of the various things written about Kennedy's assassination and things that come up. And there's a few things that I've read. There's a lot of stuff out there, but there are, I won't go into it now because it's a whole different story, but there's some convincing, very convincing evidence. Well, one, obviously, because in the 70s when Congress reviewed the whole Kennedy assassination again, what they didn't have access to was an open police motorcycles radio that was left on. He dropped the radio on the road right at the hill and went running up the hill with the other people. When they compared, this is a scientific fact, when they compared the acoustic reality of the shooting, they definitely cited that there were at least 2 resonant areas where the shots came from, not one. And that there were several shots, and more than were ever accounted for with the single assassin theory with Oswald. So there was a conspiracy. As to who did it, that evidence is also starting to come out to sufficiently that we may know. But for some odd reason, even the Kennedy family signed off on secrecy, withholding certain documentary evidence until 2060s or 2080s, something like that.
Wow, that's a long time.
But anyway, this story reminds me of that because, you know, everything about that happened, just like when Diana died, you know what all that was about and everything. But it's not a happy story, but because it was such an important person, and really, I know Kennedy was hated by lots of people for various reasons, but nonetheless beloved by others, and clearly a significant human being who was having enormous and would have had even greater impact on what now would be the present days of the United States had he lived. And you know, there were people who definitely did not want that to happen. So anyway,
should I show the movie? Or?
Yeah, Mozart was definitely, as I told you in the Mozart Costanza book, he was taken out. But I think it had more to do with
video cassette.
I think it had more to do with his personal life and so forth than it did at all in his case with his work as a composer. Salieri didn't have much.
No, he did.
And Salieri of himself was an incredibly successful man. Oh, despite Mozart being a challenger, and maybe even Salieri realized that his music like it came from God. He said, how does this guy do this?
Yeah.
Nonetheless, Salieri was a preeminent, musically dominant figure in Vienna during that period. And he, from his standpoint in the court with the public and his wealth and everything, he had nothing to worry about.
Super video store. We used to have video stores. Gosh, I miss those. Okay, so what else did I find in our closet? Well, some of your kids might like this. I wish I had this when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But these are coloring books.
Oh my.
You want to look?
Excuse me.
Good luck, babe.
Wow. You got two of the same one.
Well,
Oh no, they're different.
there's-
Bach to Berlioz and Monteverdi to Mendelssohn.
Yeah.
And then, is it just him? No, it's different guys.
Yeah.
Wow, this is really cool.
Cool,
This
yeah.
is major geeky stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Excuse me. I think you brought some of that dust with you.
All right. Well, let me show it to our buddies out here. Okay,
Wow.
folks, take a look at it. They're
This is
coloring
back in
books.
the day when classical music was obviously not
Yeah.
so
Look at
removed from most of society.
here. You have Maurice Ravel, and there's even a bio here on the other side. I would imagine it's what, second grade, third grade level. But yeah, just something to color. Here's Arnold Schoenberg. Schoenberg.
Sure.
Schoenberg. See, he's a. So, but yeah, there's three of them here. Well, four. Here's Brahms. It goes from Schumann to Stravinsky. There's two editions of this one. This one says Bach to Berlioz, and this one's from Monteverdi to Mendelssohn.
Look at the back cover of this one.
Where? Oh,
The famous trio.
check it out.
Bartok, Benny Goodman, and who else played with
Milstein?
him? Was it Milstein
I
on
think it's
violin?
Milstein. Yeah, they're doing I bet you it's a recording of the contrasts.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a famous recording of that. Pictures from
Yeah. No, they didn't have
What is
this.
in this stuff, dude? I'm starting to get nasally here.
Oh, sorry. Like I said, it was dusty. I'm so
Woo!
sorry.
Mm.
So, but yeah, like I said, it was.
Do you remember how you acquired those?
I probably picked these up over at the Half Price Bookstore
yeah.
years ago. You're
Yeah.
talking at least been a couple decades.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that's pretty much what I brought over.
Well, if
There's
it's
plenty
okay,
more.
I have a few things to share.
Okay, cool. Just kind of hoping.
I guess we'll stay, since we're looking at videos to begin with.
Okay.
Do you guys know who the comedian harmonists were? This is a really amazing 2 CD set of a lot of selections that they did. I have one or two of their CDs, but some of this music I've never seen before. There's quite, all of it was obviously picked because they were really popular. It's a total of 50 music selections here.
Wow.
And then, the comedian harmonists were a super famous, world famous ensemble in the 1920s and the 30s. They were started it was interesting, there were 5 singers, 2 tenors, 2 baritones and a bass, and the pianist, so there were 6 of them all together. At least the 2 tenors, they were Jewish, and the 1 tenor was not the super high tenor, but the one would say tenor 2. He was the founder of the whole ensemble. He put an article up in the paper and managed to secure these guys. And it's, I think it was influenced, frankly, by the American tradition of the barbershop quartets, the really fine singing and all that. But he wanted to do, maybe a German version of that, based upon German folk songs and opera and show tunes, various things like that were popular at the time, light opera and stuff. And he was, Berlin-based, sophisticated German musical training, and all these guys came from the same type of background. They were as wealthy as Michael Jackson for a period of time. I mean, they were the same kind of stardom. Huge, huge. If you're lucky, you can find some old 78s still around, and if you do, they're worth money.
Wow.
Because they were incredible. If you listen to some of their recordings, you can hear stuff online.
Yeah.
The Comedian Harmonists. And then this was a film they put out. I don't see it readily. But anyway, I remember this from at least the 90s, I think I saw it. This was a German-made film, except this was not the title in German. I forget, but this is if you want to show. So it may be, that one might be dubbed even, or certainly with subtitles. But this is their story in a movie fashion made by a German film industry. And I mean, they came to the United States, they were known here as well, but in Europe they were huge. They're traveling all the time, performing. And the Nazis took them down. Because actually there's a scene near the end of the film, which is one of their last appearances and performances, where Julius Streicher basically shut them down because, well, they had two Jews working with them, and the music was not the music that the Nazis wanted to use to espouse the spirit of Nazism. The chief of them was Richard Wagner's music. This kind of popular stuff and dancing and all that. You know, the Hitler and the Nazis, they hated jazz. And it's one of the things that when the American soldiers came over and they brought jazz with them. And, you know, there's some interesting songs that were written at the time which make fun of Adolf Hitler and it's jazz music. And then when we got set up and started to broadcast music, we intentionally broadcast jazz into the German airwaves so that people could hear it. And, you know, people that wanted to live again and know freedom and things like that, that was the music that represented freedom. But those are two really wonderful things. Then I've had old recordings, my old LPs and stuff, with Leopold Stokowski, who, in some ways, because of his super popularity, like he's the conductor that is memorialized as the guy with the white gloves and the big white mane of hair and the Bugs Bunny.
Bugs Bunny, yeah.
And also he's in the Fantasia.
Oh yeah,
he's actually in it.
Yeah, I know.
And then they build a cartoon around him and stuff, and he shakes Mickey's hand and all that.
Yeah.
He was a British-born organist by trade, and then became a conductor. And if you listen to some of his YouTube videos, he had an incredible ear for all the colors and the different voices in the orchestra, so that his performances remind me of Leonard Bernstein's work. Sometimes one of the most incredible things I've heard Bernstein do was An American in Paris with New York Philharmonic. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like the cacophony that you would expect in a turnaround traffic circle in Paris, you know, yeah, with all the different noises and everything going on, but it's really tight ensemble-wise. It's super rhythmically executed, and yet it's all present. You can choose to what to listen to, and yet there's a whole integrated performance there. Same thing when he did the works of Charles Ives, 4th of July, the symphonies. Incredible stuff. Well, and then Stokowski also was, well, he did a lot of famous arrangements of Bach's music, and then also arranged some of Wagner's music, for example, as symphonic repertoire. And in his day and age, as was actually more common and accepted as part of integrated orchestral programming, a lot of contemporary composers at the time, and he was a big proponent of 20th century composers, introduced them a lot, and importantly, he was the director for a long time of the Philadelphia Orchestra, and then Eugene Ormandy was his assistant for a certain period, and then Stokowski left, and that's when Ormandy took over, and had probably the longest reign as a conductor in American history. But I had reserved a few things on my wish list. For Stokowski, and for other reasons I bought other things first. And then in the recent years, during the COVID time, I don't know why, but Stokowski recordings just skyrocketed. I mean, there was like this one for a while when I first saved it.
What's in it?
What, the music?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. I think I bought this one for under $20 now, which is approximately the price it was when I saved it. But I saw this thing go up to over $100 or more that people were selling it for. Used copies of it, of course.
Wow.
But it's one of those ones, as Elmer showed you, that's, I imagine it's European produced. There's a bunch of boxes like that where they have 10 CDs in it. And it's a selection of his stuff. But you're missing something if you don't hear some performances of Stokowski. There is, they say in some ways it was his organist's ear, pulling all these voices together to make these very grand sounds. This is definitely a great period of like huge orchestra, wonderful colored sounds and things like that. Then, because of COVID and subsequently after that, I started to look into piano worlds that are different than what I grew up with and what I learned to love so much. I'm very much kind of probably German biased in general because I was trained mostly originally by Germans. Then I had some Russian lineage because of my teacher Howard, and he had studied with Rosina Levine and that kind of stuff came in. But otherwise, and I worked with the Perotti Quartet and chamber music members. But the Madison School, I think it's probably changing more now, but it had a powerful European and rather Germanic tradition there because Gunnar Johansson had been on the faculty, Paul Badrus-Skoda was there, so forth. But I became interested, especially in some of the stuff I've been reading in the French school. And I actually have this really cool 5 or 6 cassettes.
Yeah.
I showed you. I made a copy of it for you, right?
Yeah, you did.
All these French concerti. It was recorded all in Europe by all these different artists. And one of them I was impressed with was a woman named Marlene Doss, D-O-S-S-E. And it turns out that she was still a somewhat younger lady. She was over in the United States, and with the assistance of Paul Badrus-Skoda, interestingly, who took a great interest in her work, he helped her get situated in the States, and I forget where she was a professor for some time. But this is a project she did, I'm not sure the years, but this is the complete piano works of Camille Saint-Saëns. And she was really quite a fine pianist. I think she's still alive, but much older now. And then I also, I know this guy's playing from other things that I own on LP, but this is a wonderful collection of all kinds of French repertoire by Grant Johannesson. It's a 3 CD set. I bought that. That was a used copy. These are used copies.
Oh, yeah. I have this one, too. Check it out. Grant Johansson was a professor at Cincinnati U for a while. Yeah. And it's strange. I had one of my piano students had a grandmother who lived in Cincinnati. And she was very well acquainted with Grant Johansson. She said they used to go out to dinners, they hung out together, they watched movies together.
Wow.
So they were good friends. And I'll have to look. It's probably sitting in my closet once again. But she gave me as a parting gift this small photo album.
Oh.
And it was one of those old-fashioned plastic, photo albums. It's full. It doesn't bend or it bends. But anyways, you open it and there was photographs of her, Grant Johansson, sitting. Just having conversations, drinking tea,
cool.
And there was a reception area where they were taking pictures together, after one of his recitals or orchestra concerts. But it was just random pictures of them just hanging out.
He was, he was an American.
Yeah, he was American.
And part of that, that period of really great pianists, well trained, like who's the guy who couldn't use his hand? Leon Fleischer.
Leon Fleischer.
I mean, some of those big names that from the 50s that came out. And what's nice about him is obviously he can play the piano quite well, but he has a beautiful sound.
Oh, yeah.
And a kind of I think an appropriate kind of sophisticated reticence for this music.
Yes.
Which is very appropriate. Because actually he was beloved by the French. They loved him when he played.
Yeah.
Then Elmer, actually, I know this guy by historical reputation, and I think I have some LPs where he's featured in them. Abby Simon. Whose student was he?
He was a student of David Saberton.
David Saberton,
yeah.
Who was Godofsky's son-in-law.
Yeah.
And I found a couple of these. These were cheap. These were under $10, but these are the complete works for piano and orchestra.
Yeah.
Check
it out.
I haven't listened to them yet, but I read about, and then these are the complete works of Ravel.
Oh, yeah.
And I've partially become interested in the French music because one of my favorite pianists, who I have known for some time, but more recently I bought some of his complete recordings, was the German pianist Walter Gieseking, who was interestingly famous for playing French repertoire. Yeah. And I bought his complete Debussy and his complete Ravel recordings. And wow, his Debussy studio recordings are extraordinary, really amazing. Then there's a Canadian-French pianist who you guys will probably recognize his name. He's new in my life. I knew about him in terms of reputation, and then as a pianist, been around because now he's got white hair and all that. Marc-André Hamelin. He's Canadian, French Canadian guy, but I think he's born in Western Canada. But I saw him do one of those tiny desk concerts, and I was really struck by the repertoire that he played, because what I remember especially was, I don't remember the composer, but it was an old French, like back in Bach's time or back, French composer. And then he played some other music. It was a very fine recital, and the music was all memorized, and he played it with such cleanness and clarity and delicacy. What was obviously impressive. The guy had not just a technique, but one which could really create masterful timbres and sounds. Yeah. It was really extraordinary. And then I came to find out, as I read some more about him, this guy is regarded in the music and piano world as having one of those extraordinary techniques that can handle big stuff. So here is a recording of him doing Strauss transcriptions and other waltzes, and then this one I'm going to show them as well, the complete Godofsky etudes. I haven't listened to them yet, but I know what I'm getting in for because I have listened to some things on YouTube of his.
Whoa. Those are quite pieces.
And then in this day and age, somebody playing the Godofsky etudes, the reason, when they're played well by somebody like this, they're just ridiculously fun to listen to. Musically, sometimes they're really quite nice as well. But every time I hear some of this music performed, Earl Wild played some stuff sometimes.
He plays a few Godofsky
especially as a pianist. You hear this music and you just smile and you just kind of shake your head a little bit like, this is just way off the wall. Super
insane.
Virtuosity.
Are you kidding?
Who's that guy? Yun
Chan Lim.
Yun Chan Lim. This guy may someday want to look at Godofsky. Because he has the wherewithal to be able to play this.
Oh yeah, he probably does.
As though it's just the simplest thing in the world, I'm sure. But I have learned I've played some Godofsky. Some of his works, I've not gone deep into these monster transcriptions and things. I have worked on two or three of the etudes. I played a couple left-hand pieces that he had. They took some thinking and some riddle solving about how to work them out, especially the left-hand pieces, because how am I going to get this melodic voice to sing and still get down there and play, because it requires pedaling considerations. It has to be clean, but you need the pedal to hold that note to play this stuff. So obviously you bring out the melody, catch it in the pedal. If you're lucky, you've got a true 3-pedal piano, which he may well have used, I think, sometimes. So it'll hang on to that note, and you can play the other stuff with the damper pedal, which is accompanimental. But when you play it on a standard piano, then you're in for some challenges. I think sometimes when I've tried some of that music, like, Busoni and Debussy, both specifically when it became popular, the sostenuto pedal, which was true middle piano, that whatever you played and put it down, it would hold only those notes open, the dampers up. And then you could play dry as a harpsichord going to around it. And Busoni was quite taken with that instrument, or that pedal, that possibility. It never truly caught on sufficiently. I think it was looked at as a special color consideration or things like that, or because most sostenuto pedals now do this thing where they raise the dampers somewhere down in the baritone bass section, and they don't do the treble ones. That's often the way that it's manufactured now. But a true sostenuto, those are not easy to find.
No, it's not.
But anyway, I had one other thing I wanted to say. Two more. This is not recordings, but I wanted to promote. And someday, if we get a big enough audience, we'll be happy to do promotions for things. But the BBC Music Magazine, if you want to show them that one.
Yes.
I have had a subscription to this for last year.
I've had these issues before. They're wonderful.
This is interesting because, and I know for a fact because of some English musicians I know active in England lately, England's in a real economic bind. I think this decision they took under Boris Johnson to do the Brexit thing, where they broke out of Europe again, they're not part of the overall European Economic Union, borderless and all that kind of stuff. There was I know from having spoken with people that I knew that the British have always been independent of the continent, more or less, except when northern France and England had geographical connections, royal-wise. But the English have always kind of wanted to hold themselves separate, if anything because they also had, such a long history of being attacked by the Saxons, the Vikings, and then the French came over, all this kind of stuff. And then, of course, they ruled the world, but the British way, for a period of time. And some people might say, in the background, they're still doing certain things. But I know that recently there have been some decisions made which are really confounding and troubling musicians and musical establishments. For example, I believe English National Opera, in order to continue to receive their money, is now being made to make presentations in smaller backcountry areas of England. And I believe it was English National Opera. You guys might, if you follow this, might correct us. But one of the large, important national English music industries has physically been moved out of London for two reasons. One, they want to get it out into the backcountry a little bit. And their reason, I think, is to encourage more growth and development of audience where it hasn't been so much outside the main urban areas. But I remember, I think it was this one London organization is being moved centrally because the real estate costs so much. But that other idea of kind of moving them into the suburbs and the countryside experiences. They've been moved farther than that. I don't know, was it Birmingham or Manchester? Guys, maybe could fill us in. But I know that, and then just economically, they've been having a hard time because they're really feeling the results of, they don't have open free trade with the Europeans. They have to have customs and this and that and everything else coming and going. You know, now when you go through the channel, they're saying one of the problems is that the trucks coming and going, carrying British goods or bringing in European goods, are backed up sometimes for days because of the traffic going through, and they have to wait to clear customs and all that. It's having a serious impact on them economically. However, what's really impressive, especially just when you read the letters to the editor in here, the British, as usual, and I think this is going back to a tradition that we can historically cite even into the 18th century, where the idea of the amateur hobbyist, but going to the level of, in many cases, quite professional achievements in terms of their research or accomplishments or things they're doing. I mean, 19th century naturalist amateur scientists contributed enormously to scientific findings that eventually made their way up to the Royal Academies. And it's just exciting to see something that I remember as a young boy when I was kind of taken under the wing of some of my male adult teachers or various people that were very cultivated and cultured people who loved classical music. And they were really responsible for introducing me to books and recordings and names. I specifically remember my first important piano teacher, Robert Wynn, who I studied with for 6 years from the age of 14 to 20. Sometimes I'd just go over to his house and we'd have tea and listen to a recording of something. For example, when he taught the romantic music class at Wittenberg, one of the things on the listening list was Wagner opera. Yeah. And because it was the shortest one, he often chose, and also musically quite interesting, he chose Valkyrie. But he didn't expect all the kids to individually go to the library and listen to Valkyrie for 3.5 hours. So he had a Valkyrie party at his house. And he had food and some, non-alcoholic drinks and things, and invited everybody to come over, and we listened to the entire Valkyrie that evening at his house. That was nice. But then one of the most important people in my life, too, when I was in high school, and after that for some time, was a man named Calvin Vance, Monsieur Vance. It was my French teacher, and took a class in humanities in my senior year with him. And he was an extremely cultivated man. Going way back to when he served with the U.S. Army at the end of the Second World War, he was in the repatriation and denazification part of the Army, which was looking at individuals coming out of Germany or in Germany, or he was actually based in Vienna. So it was Germans and Austrians, that they had to basically clear them ultimately of being Nazis and things like that. Because if you were charged with stuff, then you weren't allowed to work, perform. And interestingly, what I thought was very unfortunate is that Hans Knappertsbusch, who continued, he's an older guy during the Nazi period, and he lived at least into the 60s, I believe, and was still conducting then. He did performances, and there's some famous Beethoven performance he does, which was recorded with Joseph Goebbels sitting in the front and so forth. He hated the Nazis, and he only did it for music, but he was German, he spoke German, he loved the way Germans did things, and so he didn't leave, he stayed. He wasn't Jewish either, so he didn't have anything to worry about. But he continued to work, but he didn't have a damn thing to do with the Nazis. Herbert von Karajan signed up with the Nazis as a young man. And he said he did it in order to have the freedom to make music and do the things that he did, because if not, he wouldn't have had access to the things that he had. He said he was never proactively a Nazi or anything like that. Well, what was interesting after the war was over, partially because Walter Lege in England wanted to bring von Karajan over to London and have him do all this wonderful English period recordings. There was some British help to get von Karajan out of there and continued to work, and he went to England and did that. While Knappertsbusch was shut down for something like 5 years afterwards. I think there was a period of time where he was not allowed to conduct, not allowed to work. and it seemed grossly unfair. But anyway, Calvin was part of that whole system.
Hmm.
And then when he came back to the United States, I don't know, maybe French was his thing, and he became a French teacher, and very cultured guy. And he loved ballet and opera and all that. Both of those guys were gay, which, you know, we were just wonderful friends, and they were wonderful mentors to me. But I remember Calvin, we used to correspond to each other, write letters in high school and in college. And then when I go visit him, he'd share with me some recordings from his libraries that we had. We'd sit in his living room and he'd play some music and we'd listen to it. By that point, over a little glass of cognac, you know.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, there was before the people who were mature, I think, before the 60s, were part of a well-educated, very smart, well-cultured part of our population who loved art, who loved music, and all those good things. And I was lucky to have grown up as a young boy and young man with some of those people. And what I love about the BBC is this is consummately and profoundly, completely passionate and deeply devoted to classical. The whole classical music industry. And what's in this relatively narrow magazine takes a long time to read. There's no waste in it. There's a few advertisements interspersed, but it's almost all articles, editorials, and they feature. Sometimes there's like one artist. This is Rachel Podger, who's a famous British, especially Baroque player. But what I love are the very longish and well-informed letters to the editor. This is written for people who are serious about classical music. They really like it. They're really passionate about it. And am I wrong in saying that, am I just naive and not catching on, but we don't have this kind of periodical in America?
Oh, give it time. Give it time.
Well, we did. We've talked about, between ourselves, Piano Quarterly, Clavier. Those are specific piano-oriented things. But there used to be some other magazines devoted to classical music.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's probably just because the market isn't big enough for it. They don't do it. The part of the issue, I'm sure, BBC Music, where the BBC is supported by the government. This kind of thing in Europe, where the arts are supported by the government more directly, there's government, tax money that goes into paying for this, so that it's available for people that want to have it. But anything going on in Europe, and especially in England, and what's especially helpful to me is kind of know what the cutting edge of things are, because here in the United States, I do get news from certain online organizations that help me, because I'm the administrative director, artistic director of a couple different classical music organizations here in Columbus. Helps me just kind of stay on top of who's who and what's going on. There's, of course, more European and even more so British based, but I feel this is a real serious lifeline into the classical world. I don't know if you want to just show that up with the camera, but it's worth getting. It's a little pricey, but you can get a discount on it. It ends up being about $65 a year, and I think they're every other month. You get 6 copies a year, I think. But it's worth it. And then one other thing I'd like to promote, which is actually pretty good, is online internet classical music service. It's free. It's called SlippedDisc.com, I take or something. But it's run by what's his name? Very famous
Norman
Lebrecht, a Jewish guy based in London.
Yeah.
And
very good.
It's interesting because he really seems to be on the pulse and the news of anything and everything going on in Europe. And even here in the United States, he gets news from here as well and puts it up. And
he's got more context than...
well, the fun part of it is now, because usually there's a click here if you want more information kind of thing. He gives the high points. Sometimes he has rather dramatic titles on there. The fun part is to read the comments.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, oh my God, depending on what it is, there could be 40 people who've commented, you know, and then they're arguing with each other.
Yeah.
It's informative. It's very helpful to know some information. Some of the people accuse him of misleading or not really checking his facts. Sometimes he'll respond to that.
Yeah.
But in and of itself, it really stimulates, an international conversation in English about all things classical music going on in the world. I strongly suggest it's free. Just add it to your news feed and you can get it. I get at least one, if not more than one, article or news information from it every day. And the other thing, I know you watch this, and I watch him sometimes. There's a guy named David Horowitz.
Yes.
You want to talk about him?
Well, you could. Yeah.
I don't know what he calls his show, but
classical music guide or the guide to classical music something.
He spells his name HURVITZ. WITZ.
Yeah.
He's in the East Coast somewhere, but he's recording authority. He basically is talking about recordings every day. He does a show.
Yeah.
And he's either upstairs in the main area or he's downstairs now what he calls the
overflow room. Yeah.
And recently he did a almost 30-minute show on his Wagner.
I know. I saw that.
Boy, and I have some of the things that he was talking about. The guy really, now he is a musician. I forget, he played some string instrument or something.
Yeah.
So he's had some occasional experience, not huge, he's not a huge professional. I gather from what he said he's not massively adept, but enough so that he's like playing in community orchestras.
Yeah.
He had the experience, he said, one time of playing a Mahler symphony.
Yeah.
And what that felt like being in it and so forth. But from that position, you know, like these guys are telling me they have recording reviews in here.
Yeah.
In the BBC magazine. This guy is a little bit part of a somewhat slightly past generation thing of a recording columnist who would comment on things. It used to be very common in all the American mags, you know, there'd be these reviews like that, and this guy clearly has a lot of experience, and he has his opinions about things.
Yeah, you won't agree with him 100%.
Well, because sometimes he also puts up audio. Does he do that, or maybe that's
once in a while?
Disc.
Very rare.
Slip Disc will sometimes put in audio performances.
Very rare occasion.
And I don't mean to be a prude or anything like that, but I am the age I am, and I'm a pretty adept concert pianist on my own. I have musical thoughts. Sometimes I'll put up something and think, wow, this is just the cat's meow, and I'll listen for a little bit, and I thought, not really. It's a little boot stompy, a little aggressive. A little insensitive to nuance and things like that, and I turn it off, move on. But I think, you know, if you're interested, certainly if you're interested in building a collection of recordings, I mean, David Horowitz's thing is probably a way you could get some good advice about finding some things you might want to listen to. So that's my contribution.
Wow, that's wonderful.
How are we doing? So what are we going to talk about?
Super. I mean, I just wanted to mention. Where is that? Abby Simon. Abby Simon has been one of my heroes for years.
Wow.
I mean, for years. I'm one of the earliest. I guess my first introduction to Abby Simon was back in college, and I found this vinyl record of him. You know, sitting down on a bench.
I have a Chopin.
Yeah.
When he's played some Chopin.
Yeah. He's recorded all the Chopin.
He's not one of the pianists in that box of all the Chopin's music with like Yerba Novaes and the Italian Orazio.
No, he's not in.
He's not in that one.
He's not in that one.
Okay.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. No, this record album was. I mean, he was sitting among the trees. You could see the leaves behind him, and he's in a semi casual suit, and he's smoking a pipe.
Oh.
He's holding this pipe, and I thought, Abby Simon, never heard of the guy, and I thought at first he was like one of those crooners or you know what I mean, a country singer, maybe a folk singer type, until I looked at the back of the album to see what the contest was, and he was a pianist, and he was a hell of a pianist.
Yeah.
Because in the back, he's got let's see, he's playing the Mozart list Don Giovanni.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know. I freaked out.
Horowitz made a recording that as a young guy, right?
As a young guy,
Was
I'm not sure, but he does play excerpts of it in the deleted scenes of The Lost Romantic.
Really?
Yeah, he does. He was an older guy. He does the Champagne area.
He was famous way back when he was in some of his early 30s.
Yeah.
Recordings. He recorded one of the transcriptions of Mozart's stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Go on.
But let me go on.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
He also does the symphonic metamorphosis on the Liedermaus.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does the, let's see, Albani's Godowski Triana. I mean, as if it's not even hard enough.
Yeah.
You know, Godowski had to, really put more notes in it. And he does a couple of the Liebeslied and Liebesfreude by Kreutzer, transcribed by Rachmaninoff.
Yep.
And let's see.
Liebeslied.
Yeah.
And
Liebeslied?
Liebeslied means the sorrow of love, and Liebesfreude is the joy of love. Yeah.
Okay, got it. All right. Let's see. There was one other one. Oh, the Gluck's Gambadi, Dancing of Bloods and Spirits is on there. But it's probably sitting in my closet somewhere. I have to find it.
You know, when you talk about that, historically, well, I was having a conversation with a physicist actually at the Mintercourse rehearsal Tuesday night, because he said, "Have you seen the Oppenheimer movie? But I want to go see that."
Yeah.
I don't know if Laura will go with me or not, but would you be interested in it?
Yeah, I'd go.
And I understand they used IMAX to record it, so if we could find it in an IMAX theater, that would be an incredible experience, I think.
Wow.
I'd like to see it, because this, my God, it's been hyped in the news feeds I get.
Yeah, I'm sure.
About
Yeah.
stuff. But anyway, David and I were talking a bit. Well, he was talking about some things about the film and the history of Oppenheimer. He actually, when he got into his first job, 1965, in New Mexico, Los Alamos, he was hired by a guy that helped actually physically put the bomb together and worked with Oppenheimer.
Whoa.
So he was talking about things, and he asked him, about, and then he also told me another time when he was at a conference where Edward Teller was the speaker, and then there were some other speakers, and he wasn't interested in that, so he left afterwards. And for like 25 minutes, he and Edward Teller were alone out in the hall outside the conference room and talking. You know who this was? Famous German physicist. Yeah. Anyway, what we talked about a little bit was, I'm the music director of the local German singing society, the Columbus Mintercourse, which includes a male chorus and a female chorus. And I also am the director of the regional area of Northern Ohio, and then I'm the national music director of more than 100 of these ensembles. And, these people are Germanic heritage, and in many cases Germans that left because of the Nazis. But the Nazis left a scar on German heritage, which is in this day still hard to get past. In fact, I'm working on hopefully building bridges in Columbus right now with the Jewish community and the German people. I would really like to see some kind of rapprochement, because what I noticed was I'm a practicing Buddhist, and specifically the Japanese version called Shingon, which is very old. It's the oldest form of Buddhism that went after the Buddha died. It went up into South China, and then was eventually in the 9th century taken over by a brilliant Japanese monk, Kukai, who studied for 6 years in China and then took it back to Japan. And then he became the preeminent leader of the faith, so it ended up in Japan, was the primary religion for about 400 years, and then other things developed over time. And they reemerged after the Second World War from up in the mountains, came down and passed on their knowledge. I'm quite taken with a philosophy and practice it that way as a spiritual message. But there's a Tibetan Buddhist temple here in Columbus. They now have a new building built, which took a few years to get it done, but the older place they were in burnt down. And in the time while we didn't have a home, and they'd lost almost everything in the fire, we were taken in by Temple Iskaret. They actually opened their doors, Jewish synagogue, over on Broad Street in Columbus, and allowed us to come in and do a Sunday morning. I think even other things we do during the week, but to do the Sunday service in their downstairs community room. And we actually have an altar set up and we do our service and such. But what I noticed down there were all these old black and white photographs of various Jewish people from the community in Columbus, going back to the turn of the 20th century. And I reflected on how many Germanic names were there. Lots of German Jews. And we had, until recently, a wonderful member named Steve Maurer, who I'll mention. Love you, Steve. He passed a while back from lung cancer. He was never a smoker. It was, I don't know how I started on him, but it got him. He died last year, I think now. But Steve was from a farm town up around where Neil Armstrong was born in northwestern Ohio. And then he became active. He was a state senator for a period of time here in Ohio. And then for a long time, he was the head of the whole agricultural office of the state of Ohio, and was 3 times served as the federal representative in Ohio for agriculture with, what was it? It was, I think, beginning with George Bush Sr., Clinton, and then George W. He served in those 3 administrations. Not in the administration, but here in the state. But Steve was a historian of some amount. And when he was younger, he'd gone to Germany and studied Germany and so forth. And he was a German high school teacher where before he got involved in politics. But he knew this stuff. And the funny thing was when we'd sing that regular German songs they do afterwards, after the rehearsal per se, Steve would go on with the next verse and the next verse and the next verse, all up here. Amazing mind. But he used to talk about the German community historically. And that interestingly, the big anti-German sentiment was not in the Second World War, because a lot of Germans had already integrated into American culture. It was the First World War, because Americans were PO'd when we finally got sucked into the end of the First World War. And I always think, America got pulled in, and we went in 1917, and within 14 months it was over. We sent in American soldiers, that was it. They declared the armistice and it was done. But Americans were seriously not interested in getting involved in European things. Yeah. And we had a 19th century experience with, we all left there because we'd had enough of Europe. This is a new country, new ideas and stuff, not fight their own problems. But there was a huge anti-German sentiment during the First World War, so much so that Schiller Park, during that period, changed its name to some American person for a while, and street names changed their names from pure German words to English ones. A lot of them subsequently changed back in the 20th century. And there were families that began to move out of German village because they didn't, even though they were German, they wanted to integrate even more into general American society. So Steve said, he said the first big break, sadly, with in the community was during the First World War, but then, of course, with the Nazis. He said it wasn't necessarily immediately when we were in the war, but afterwards, when the whole public realized what happened at the concentration camp, the death camps. He said that's when things that was it. And when I talk to Jewish people that I've known around, I'm not speaking 100% for everybody, and I know it is a super feisty topic, so I don't want to insult anybody, and I'm not being insensitive or anything, but I felt when you look at the history of Germany and look at like the Mendelssohn family, now they weren't practicing Jews. In fact, they changed their name to Mendelssohn Bartholdy. But Felix Mendelssohn's grandfather was Moses Mendelssohn, who's one of the important philosophy figures in the chain of philosophers, especially German ones, in that period of time. And then you look at the names in the families in the 18th, especially 19th century and the early 20th century. Serious cultural, business, influential people, movers and shakers in German culture. Germany excised a significant portion of its spirit by cutting away the Jewish people under the Nazis. And of course, I think everybody knows in this day and age, subsequently Germany is honestly more than made up for, or tried to anyway. It's those Nazi years of violation. It's one of the most multicultural countries in Europe now. And interestingly, just like the United States, we were a pack of, not pure breeds, but, mixed breed doggies that all came over here in America and all mixed bunch in the pot. Germany became a melting pot in the later 20th century. And interestingly, America and Germany, hardworking, intelligent. We got supposedly the dredge of a lot of people, that were leaving other places. Two of the strongest, wealthiest countries in the world, relatively.
Yeah.
Germany is the farthest, the wealthiest country in Europe now again, and has had for some time some really open civil laws about people, and some specific ones. Anything to do with Nazis is strictly forbidden in Germany. They're not allowed to exist, really, frankly, and they go after the skinheads, various people. My apologies to you guys, but you're not likely to be part of our audience, I doubt. But my point was in this, I wanted to talk about it anyway, so that maybe we get just a little public coverage and maybe some discussion about some ideas. A fellow named Harry, who's in our choir, who's so sympathetic to the Jewish cause because he has Jewish blood in his family, although it didn't make it through to be dominant. But he actually went over and served a period of time as a soldier in the Israeli army. He learned how to shoot and did the boot camp stuff like that, but he did desk duty stuff. He was a dentist. But he served his time honorarily, for that. And he went with another buddy of his who's actually now practicing rabbi in Worthington, Ohio. They went and served together. And then I discovered a while back, I have on my grandmother's side in the Ramby family, on my mom's mom, going back a ways, I had a Jewish great something grandmother on my mom's side, French.
Wow.
But she married a Christian and converted because there was never any Jewish religious practice, and I don't even know that there managed to ever be much culturally either, because I never really heard anything. And certainly by the time I was around and Mom grew up and with her mom and dad, and I spent a lot of time with Grandma and Grandpa. There was never really anything about Jewish, anything that was brought up. But I'm hoping to get a concert put together where we might do some choral singing and maybe even get musicians as well to do a concert which may help to culturally bridge the German and Jewish community, because I think both have lost things. I look at Jewish people, and I love this expression I learned some time ago. It's an idea that our life, I think I learned this from Calvin, actually, from somebody. I have to look it up and see what that source is, but our life is like a tapestry. And as we continue to live, we add more threads to the tapestry. And remember, one thing that was said in context was, everything is woven into the tapestry. All the beautiful things, all the ugly things. It's all part of it.
Yeah.
If we work really hard to remove the ugly things, like totally forget them, that somehow they were formative parts of our life, and that awful things can, with wise choices, help lead us into good decisions, better decisions about how to be or what to do. certainly not to repeat those kind of things. But the thought was is that if you pull out all the threads of the old stuff that was so terrible, you forget it, then there's a hole in your tapestry. It's blank. And over time, if you forget it, and other people see the tapestry of your life, they're going to think, well, what was in that whole part right there? What's all that stuff that's missing? There's no color. There's only just the canvas. There's nothing in there. I thought about that and how bad that, because I have talked to some Jewish people. One of the ladies I've spoken with who's working with us to help us, her family's German. And the reason that we got together is because she's so curious about her family. Sadly, most of them died in concentration camp. They were from northern Germany somewhere. But she became interested in her family. Her father had managed to come over before, they got taken. But most of his cousins and a lot of the rest of the family are dead. Some of them died not in the concentration camp, but just died because of privation in the Second World War. Well, it turns out that the town that her father was from and Harry's family is from are very near each other in northern Germany. And Harry contacted a cousin of his and said, now, she's a dear lady, and I want you to take good care of her there and show her around. She's curious to see the village, a little bit bigger than a village where her family lived. And the guy hosted her while she was there, took her to see. Some of the buildings were there. Most of the place where her family lived had been torn down or destroyed. But there was a cemetery there, Jewish, that had been somehow left alone mostly. And there were relatives buried there in that cemetery. And she subsequently decided, because she has the right to do this as a Jew, German Jew, heritage. The law in Germany allows people who were cast out of Germany or things were taken from them or so forth by the Nazi government, they can reapply for German citizenship and then have all the benefits of the citizenship. And Harry helped her do that. Helped her get out. So now she has both her American and her German citizenship.
Wow, not bad.
So I'm hoping to put something like that together here, with the idea that maybe the immediate communities here, certain people could maybe begin to fill in their tapestries here. Because it's not excusing the horrendous.
Yeah.
Oh my God, the horrors of the things that have done. I mean, there's so many areas of the world in the 20th century have experienced genocide. But the problem, I think, with being a victim, and I say something myself, it's nothing we need to talk about a lot, but in my own very direct personal family, I was a victim of child abuse. A lot of the time growing up, physical abuse. And it took me a while in my adult years to kind of work through all of that stuff, to work it out. And I think I have, come to see it in context and all this kind of thing. And I'm fine. I think I'm fine mostly, really. But when I was younger, still, and then dealing with it as a young adult, I met some folks in Madison, Wisconsin, and there was a woman I came to know, a husband and wife, and this woman and her sister had been victims of abuse. Well, she more so. And she was in a women's support group, and she'd been in it for 10 years.
Huh.
And at the time I said to her, I said, Sarah, I said, people's eyesight goes bad, they get glasses. If their hearing isn't working, they get hearing aids. If they break an arm or a leg, they get it fixed, try to retrain how to work, or if it's not hurting, you use a cane or something like that. But it's interesting that the physical stuff we try to overcome. But the emotional and the spiritual stuff, and I do understand it lasts a lot longer. But shouldn't one make efforts to heal? And she said, well, that's kind of what we're doing. I said, but how far along are you after 10 years? And she said, well, yeah, maybe, you're right about some of it. But that set me on the path of realizing I don't want to remember this shit and suffer through this shit the remainder of my life. Because one of the things I realized that when you're a victim, the victimizer is still somehow controlling the strings, even though they're gone, or not present anymore. Yeah. You're still being that person who was created or developed or influenced by the abuse, by all of that. You have to cut the strings and then learn how to be like Pinocchio, where he turns into a real boy. Yeah. Become a fully fledged human and grow past the victimhood and become the beautiful person that you have within you to be as much as possible. And I think when you begin to see those things and learn about those things and be joyful about those things, then it's really wonderful. Because as you might know, if you're a victim, it's not wonderful. I know people who still suffer terribly. They have nightmares about stuff that happened decades ago. And it's not that the stuff will go away, and it's not that you should, I don't know how to put it, it's not that you forget it. That's not the right thing to do. One is you have to get to that point of a certain kind of forgiveness, but more than forgiving the abuser, forgiving yourself, because very often they have said things to us or make it feel like with women who suffer sexual abuse and stuff, but your fault. If you hadn't dressed that way or you hadn't behaved that way, then maybe nothing would have happened to you. That's bullshit. And that's really worse in some ways than the abuse itself, because the female victim really takes that inside of herself and is angry and upset with themselves as much as they are with the person that never did it. It's really the longer term mental and emotional stuff that hangs on, especially if there were words. Because that whole thing about sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me, that is 180% bullshit. The words is what hurts. You can heal from physical wounds, Look at Jewish people that have learned to be relatively healthy and lead a happy life and, move beyond their pain. The numbers are still there on the arm with the ones that are still alive. And, they were starving to death and beaten and things like that. And a lot of people I know, I've seen some wonderful things. It's those Jewish victims who managed to move in some way to not be victims, not to forgive the Nazis and not to forget it, but in a sense to realize that it wasn't at all their fault. There was nothing they did to deserve it. They just got caught in the middle of some serious bullshit and got scapegoated. So anyway, this has little to do with piano, right? Except, I think with all the musicians I've known in my life, a lot of us have had our share of trauma or, things like that. And I'm sure that I approached music because it was a place of great beauty and emotional peacefulness. It was a place, I think, where I could place my personal emotions into the music. I was as Elmer knows when he first heard me play stuff, I was a really earth-shaking kind of player. When I played lists and stuff, I put everything into that music. I still, I think, play very well, but it's not founded on the trauma itself. The trauma now has become perhaps vocabulary to use in expressing something emotional that people might resonate with. But I'm not quivering and shaking in my boots and having nightmares and stuff like that anymore. And in a sense, that's what I kind of would like to try to do for the people in that small but perhaps substantial way, Jews who have German heritage and the Germans who in a sense lost access to that entire German Jewish cultural legacy, that both communities could heal together with some kind of understanding. And anyway, I didn't intend to talk about any of that at all, but I don't think it's unimportant. But that's what I'm doing. I didn't even know I got into it, so we can move on to whatever you want to, because just let that one fall if you want.
Oh, well, you can decide how you do it. Anyways, you mentioned earlier.
Well, I know, it's about the pianist. That's why I started talking about this, because of Abby Simon. But when you think about it, what I was going to say, what I was talking about that physicist, in the early 20th century, from the late 19th and into the early 20th century, Germany was culturally, scientifically, and medically the guiding light in the world in so many areas. Yeah. Some of the most stupendous achievements came out of there. And then a lot of those people were German Jews, who, very fortunate for the United States, immigrated before the Nazis could get to them. They had the good sense to get the hell out of Dodge before it became too late. And America prospered tremendously by this in the arts, in science, in medicine. So many of the cutting edge thinking at that time was introduced into American society and American universities. And from our particular area, we had Godowski up there in Eastman, right? Eastman and what's the city? Buffalo. Hoffman was down at the Curtis Institute. Rudolf Serkin came over there and was part of that thing. A lot of guys, Mieczyslaw Horjovsky, the Levines up at Juilliard.
Alexander Salabi.
Adele Marcus was Jewish too, I think.
Adele Marcus.
I mean, all of these people that came over here. And then there were other pianists. Rudolf Grantz, I don't think he was Jewish, but he had a huge influence in Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
And then Albi Zerko in California, who was Arthur Schnabel, who was also Jewish, Arthur Schnabel's first American piano assistant. He worked and taught people that were going to play for Schnabel. He moved to California and became a great teacher there, and was my first professor piano teacher. Robert Wynn got his doctorate at USC with Albi Zerko. Yeah. But the thing is if you look at the sudden eruption of American pianists coming up in the 40s and the 50s.
Paul Hindeman.
And Paul Hindeman. Schoenberg was out in California. Yeah. John Cage studied composition with Schoenberg. I mean, just think of the names back in those days. You know, there was Abby Simon, for example, and there was, Horowitz was already over here well before then, but he certainly would have had to have left had he stayed longer. As Rubinstein got out pretty much just in time before the Nazis got to Paris. They took his home, his art, and everything, and he moved to Beverly Hills, and he took citizenship here. Horowitz was over here longer because he was into New York and the money and realized America was the big place to make the big money. Plus Toscanini was here. He liked Horowitz, and he ended up marrying Toscanini's daughter, so he was well situated. Nonetheless, famous student of his, Byron Janis. Major player. And then Leon Fleischer, for a period of time, was a hugely respected player. The Beethoven Complete and Brahms Concerti that he recorded with George Sell are recorded some of the most stupendous collaborations of those concerti ever made. And you look at Ivan Davis, Grant Johannesson, a whole bunch of these guys that came out. Willie Capel would have been one of them, but sadly died in that airplane crash in San Francisco. And at that time, it became a little bit more, because of the Cold War, it was us versus them, the Russians, that we had these players. And it was, these were Herculean, Promethean type pianists. Like Abby Simon and the kind of repertoire they took on. Now, Earl Wild, in his own way, amazingly, he made a great living. And he was Toscanini's orchestral pianist. The NBC Orchestra. And then he stayed with NBC and worked writing and doing shows and stuff, and writing music, arranging music for NBC television, which is where he made a beaucoup amount of money. He had a very nice bank account. And then as time went on, he went and kind of returned to public performance. Eventually he was here in Columbus as an artist in residence. You heard him.
Oh, yeah.
Met
to see his master classes and everything.
America had some kick-ass pianists.
Oh, yeah, we did.
Those guys had then an influence on the next generation. And it's not to say that we don't have really good teaching and good pianists working in this country, but I do find it interesting, and I'm a little naive because I don't pay as much attention as you do. We don't seem to be creating as many at that level, competing out there in the international arena as we did.
No.
We're not doing it now. Like we talked about in the last show, Korea seems to have hooked onto a magnificent tradition. They're great because there's been another pianist that won a big award in Australia.
Yeah.
Huge national competition. And then Yun Chan
Lim. Bagpiper competition.
This guy plays like this old turn of the century European Jewish pianists who could just make magic. I mean, this is why I hope that someday he may turn his eyes on Godowski just for the hell of it.
Yeah.
Because he has not just the extraordinary technique, but the nuance and the sensitivity and the delightfulness of the way that he can play things. As I said, I think last week, when he played the Rachmaninoff Third, I've never heard it played with such graciousness and delicacy in some places, and playfulness in a way, and well, of course, it's a remarkable ease. Yeah. And it's one of the most fearsome concerti ever written.
He's young.
Yeah. 18 years old.
18 years old.
So, American pianists, it's a hard life.
Yes, it is.
You devote a good 10 to 20 years of training from as a little kid, and you have to practice your scales, you have to practice your arpeggios, you have to do all that kind of stuff, and you want to be with a good teacher. And the most important thing really is having truly good teachers, hopefully, who have a very good, I would say, older school understanding of technique. Technique is an important aspect of the training, and that's fundamentally going to be possibly at least 10 years of your training. The old-fashioned way, like in Leschetizky's day, they mostly put you to work on scales and etudes and exercises for a period of time, and then they would introduce certain repertoire at a very staged and technically understood level until you got to a point there was repertoire that was off the charts. Yeah. You weren't allowed to bring that to lessons because you're not ready for it. You may be able to play it physically, but you haven't gotten anywhere close to the development of your spirit and your soul to truly understand the music and play it in a way that it means anything, you know? And it was interestingly in the old days, the German schools like this. A lot of the great conductors were pianists. They would study, and then if they were so drawn to the conducting world, Bruno Walter's an example, finely trained pianist. There's some recordings of him accompanying some song music with Lotte Lehmann, for example. And what he did was absolutely the way it was done. He went to Hamburg. He became an apprentice in the opera house as a conductor and helped to prepare to do rehearsals. No, he started out as a coach, helped prepare the singers for the performances, get them ready, and then he became a little bit. If you showed an aptitude or an interest in it, then they might give you. He seems to be doing pretty well. He'd like run some orchestra rehearsals or opera rehearsals with the orchestra. Get them ready, or get the orchestra ready for the music before the maestro shows up, to put his stamp on everything. And then you get a Saturday matinee, and then if that went well, he did okay, the audience seemed to like that, we were impressed. That's maybe, next season, let's give him something. And he raised up through the opera house ranks where he became a preeminent opera conductor, still as a relatively young man. And then as he got into his 30s, and by his 40s, he was ready to take over a symphony. Because from the German point of view, and I think other schools were also a bit like this in the old days, you had to understand and appreciate fully how the human voice made music so that you could finally teach the strings how to play that way when they had the melody in the symphonies. They had to approach, everything was approached to from the sensitivity of how would a human being do this? How do you make it human? And understand and feel it that way. And that's one of the things, he played big orchestra. His Mozart orchestras was 100 people, which nowadays is kind of overdone. But listen to the play. One of the really great YouTube performances is one that he did in Austria, Vienna, with the Vienna Philharmonic just before he got out for the Nazis came. He went from there to Paris, and then went from there to London, and then eventually they brought him to the United States permanently. But there's a performance of the Jupiter Symphony.
Yeah.
The tempo of the last movement, I mean, Roger Norrington, step aside.
Yeah.
This is fast and brisk. It's the Vienna Philharmonic. They play like gods. The clarity and the rhythmic precision is extraordinary. And yet it was the whole damn orchestra.
Yeah.
But that's the way it used to be done. And what I like about Yun Chan Lin is they asked him, well, what are you going to do now? And he said, well, I have concert engagements I have to fulfill because I won.
Yep.
And some recording contracts and so forth. But, while I do that, in the meantime, I'm going to go back home and keep taking lessons with my teacher.
Yeah, keep finishing studies, basically.
Yeah.
Still finishing the studies. Well, anyways, what I wanted to mention about Abby Simon.
Oh. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Abby Simon.
I get rolling.
If some of you don't know who the work this guy does, I feel that he has to be included with a roster of like Earl Wild, George Bollett.
Absolutely.
Of those guys.
That kind of pianist.
Because he has that kind of repertoire. He does. I mean, anybody that plays that much Godofsky and that much Chopin, and he even has the one CD he released with Vox. Is it Vox? Yeah, the Vox. He's recorded all the Rachmaninoff concerti as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he's wonderful. Anyways,
those are some interesting people to look up if you don't know that part of the history. If you want to look up, including everybody out there in the world, I mean, come on, we all know Van Cliburn.
Yep.
He was actually a little bit of a late comer in that group of pianists.
Yeah.
He didn't show up until '58 when he won the Van Cliburn, won the Tchaikovsky.
Yeah.
And I mean, my God, there's stupendous recordings. One of my favorites is an LP I have. I've got it on CD now as well. But of the Prokofiev Sixth, and the other side is the Barber.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
The Scherzo and the Barber was just amazing.
Yeah.
But the Prokofiev, I mean,
yeah.
And then, of course, Van Cliburn played the original version of the Rachmaninoff Second Sonata. Oh, even Rachmaninoff, when he'd rewritten it, Rachmaninoff finally said after he'd finished it and everything, he went back and looked at it and he said, Chopin's sonata only lasts about a half hour, and this is 20 minutes longer than that. I better cut some stuff. And if you ever get a chance to hear Van Cliburn's performance of it, because the Ruskies recorded all that stuff and it's since been released a long time ago into the West, but listen to Van Cliburn's recording of the Rachmaninoff Second Sonata in B-flat minor that he played, and it's a live recording. I mean, you just sit back and listen. It has this huge sound, this variety of dynamics, and this grandeur.
Now, there's your Joseph Levin. There's your Joseph Levin tradition.
The way those guys used to play, when they would lay that kind of a workout, and a grandeur in a sense somehow that it always is fascinating, keeps you there, keeps you present. Yeah. But it's not in a hurry. There's it's also in a sense from a kind of time before everybody is so much in a hurry all the time. Yeah. That's one of the things that's missing from a lot of modern playing. Yeah. Like there are some pianists, there was some I read about, there's a rather famous one, who a lot of comments about her was that she'd play faster than anybody, but is it really worth it? That oftentimes, I don't mean to be offensive this way, but this is always part of the Olympic aspect, the competitive aspect, and I'm very, I think, naive, and I think most artists would say yes, but it's also a youthful thing. Play fast. Everybody did. Horowitz played some things absurdly fast. Oh, yeah. But he had remarkable control, and Rubinstein said that was the hair-raising part of it.
Oh yeah.
He said, I could play a lot of stuff fast, but there have been a lot of missed notes and stuff laying on the ground by the time
Yeah, that's what he said.
And that's not really what it's all about, people. It's never about. I mean, some of the silly pieces, as we talked, maybe Godowski and so on. Part of that is just, it is about showmanship, but it's with Godowski, it really is hard, and it really is delightful and amazing. I mean, it's like watching serious acrobats, just serious high wire stuff.
Oh yeah.
Like you're just waiting to see if they actually still land on the wire, or they land in the net.
Yeah.
That's how dangerous this stuff is to play.
Yeah, when you're playing Godowski, you know, you're not just talking about polyphony,
No.
but you're talking polyrhythmic, polydynamics, and
His mind,
careful pedaling.
the guy was mean. He was fundamentally self-trained.
Yeah,
which is remarkable.
Yeah, that's the remarkable.
As a relatively good finished pianist, when he was, what, in his 20 or 20 or something like that?
Probably.
He was in Paris and he took lessons with Camille Saint-Saëns.
Yeah, he did.
For a while. He talks, and those stories are really good. He talks about Saint-Saëns as an old guy, old French guy, small character and all this, a little pudgy. He put his sock feet up on the footstool, big footstool next to the heater.
Yeah.
And probably smoked.
Probably.
And Godowski would play for him at the piano, and he, comment about things like that.
Yeah.
But the extraordinary thing about Godowski, they said, was he, from a pianistic and a piano methodology legacy, he figured it out himself.
Yeah.
And people were always fascinated because he played, especially with a certain ease.
Yeah, yeah.
Played.
We'll definitely have a program about him one of these days.
His colleagues would say, when he played in Berlin.
Yeah.
When he made his debut in Berlin.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Pandemonium. Everybody went here. All the great pianists would always show up for the guys first, because, they had to see who the competition is.
Yeah.
We're impressed.
Yes, absolutely.
And Godowski had quite a legacy. Let's not forget Hoffman, too. He was a child prodigy who gained the attention of the SPC or whatever it is that.
Yeah.
But it was a society thing about protecting children from worker abuse and stuff. Because there was a period of time where sometimes when I was 10 or 12 years old, and he played how many concerts in so many days?
So many concerts.
And they came down and they said, this is not right for a child.
It was 70 concerts in 2 months.
70 concerts in 2 months. That's almost one every day. And of course, that meant, sometimes in the same city, but that meant traveling by train in other places. Yeah. That was brutal.
That is.
But then Hoffman was Hoffman. He studied with Rubinstein.
Yeah.
And wrote these remarkable compositions.
Oh, yeah.
Well, between the two of them, between Godowski at Buffalo and Hoffman in Philadelphia.
And Rachmaninoff.
And Rachmaninoff around too. But those two guys as teachers, David Saberton married Godowski's daughter and then taught in Eastman as well, I believe. New York, maybe he was in New York too. Yeah. But he produced some extraordinary pianists.
Oh, yeah. And
then Tchaikovsky, for example, was a student of Hoffman's.
Yeah, he was.
They just as teachers, they began to create a legacy, passing on those traditions of what was that kind of almost magical Eastern European kind of school of piano playing, the old Russian school.
And
the Slavs, and to some extent, the kind of pianists that came out, maybe with a little bit more fussy training with Leschetizky, but still were capable of making magic. Did Friedman study with Leschetizky?
Yes, he did.
Played. Yeah, he played for him. I think he was a little bit older when he came in. But even Paderewski came in as a 20-year-old.
Yeah.
And originally,
there's a story about that.
Leschetizky said, "If you're coming to me for piano lessons now, it's too late.
Yeah.
Now all pianists should be completely finished in Marengo by the time they're 17 or 18 years old, like Lim. But he didn't take him on, and then of course, Paderewski really was a stupendously amazing pianist. He was the best paid.
Oh yeah.
He had his own private train in America or in Europe. Travel always by train in his own personal train. And the interesting thing I'm reading in that 19th century book are the programs that he put on. Sometimes there were programs where then they'd list the encores afterwards that he played.
Yeah.
The encores went on for 45
minutes. Yeah, I know.
It was like the first half or so of a contemporary program nowadays.
Yeah.
The guy easily did 3-hour programs.
Oh, yeah.
Liszt was amazed when he was an older guy and he was hearing some of this stuff that people developed. Rubinstein's famous historic recitals and things like that. Liszt would come in, and after about 3 hours of music, he said, "Well, I'm astonished what it's come to. To be quite honest, it's probably a bit too much."
Yeah.
The guy who more or less developed the modern piano recital.
Yeah.
So,
a word about one selection in the Ravel disc that the Abby Simon does. The work is called La Valse.
oh,
We all know, a lot of people know this work as an orchestral work. I still think
Ravel's arrangement?
this is Ravel's arrangement, but there's a story behind this one. I would imagine that Abby Simon was probably one of the earlier first to record this work for piano.
Mm-hmm.
But I know the story from where it came from. And of course, like you said, lots of Ravel's orchestral work started out as works for piano. But the American pianist, Leonard Pinario.
Oh, yeah.
Leonard Pinario wanted to perform La Valse. He always thought it sounded good on piano, so he began working and writing an arrangement of La Valse, only to discover later that Ravel had already done it, and so he didn't have to do it. So he was happy to buy a copy of the score from Duran, and that's how he learned the work. So actually, Leonard Pinario was probably the first to add it to his repertoire and perform it regularly.
There's a very interesting video performance I've seen of that. He probably did it on Canadian TV. It was Glenn Gould.
Glenn Gould, yeah.
And I don't know if that's the original or if it's not some working.
Oh, Glenn Gould's arrangement.
It's his own arrangement.
Yeah,
it's really quite interesting.
Oh yeah.
Glenn Gould loved Baldwin pianos. Interestingly, that's the ones he tended to use.
Wow.
And what's really amazing about the guy's playing, in general, is clarity in the voices. Of course, perfect for Bach, but not just the clarity, but the direction of the lines, the way that he would play, because he's rather infamous for singing while he was playing.
Yeah.
But I think it really informs the music making itself, because what I loved about his performance of La Valse, it's a gripping interpretation.
Oh yeah.
Just in terms of the overall timing of how it envelops. That's the right word. Just opens up and rolls along, and everything is so clear. And then it's amazing.
Yeah.
And when some people back when he made that famous Bach recording in the 50s, and people begin to hear him a little bit before that time, he didn't go to Juilliard. Right? I think he was thoroughly trained in Canada. Yeah, thoroughly came out of Canada. It was like Canada dropped a little small nuclear bomb on New York when he first showed up. It's like, who is this guy? Is he from Juilliard? No. Well, where the hell did he study? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it was an explosive presence. I mean, and once especially once he did the Bach recording, he was super famous. Everybody and their mother wanted to hire him. I mean, this was years before Van Cliburn won the Tchaikovsky.
Do young people these days know who Glenn Gould is?
Oh, you should.
You should.
Because the problem with the guy, he was an enormously sensitive artist. And I think, privately and personally, I've talked with my partner Laura about this, because she knows a lot about this thing.
Yeah.
He was most likely on what they call the spectrum.
Yeah.
If not, what do you call it? Rain Man kind of guy. What do you call that condition?
Autistic?
Not autistic, but what do they call it nowadays? There's another slightly less serious
Savant?
form. No,
No.
I forget what they call it, but these people who tend towards that, where I think part of the issue is, this is the way we think, or I'd say Laura and I do. The problem with autistic people and people like this, I don't think their minds have ever fully become encapsulated in this realm, in here. I think that, I believe anyway, as a Buddhist and for various reasons, we are souls having a mortal experience, and then we die and we go back to being souls again, spirits. We come in as a spirit. Chinese medicine believes the very first thing that develops in the mother is what's called the Sanjiao, the triple heater, which is the one of the 12 meridians, which is only just recently being recognized by Western medicine. But basically, the Sanjiao is, in a sense, a force field, which is created in the womb of the mother, which happens immediately after the sperm fertilizes the egg. So it's a place where the egg will be safe. And it's importantly so, Sanjiao, because it's a safe place for the spirit to be in the body as it makes its transition from the spirit realm into the physical. And it comes in and it lives in there, protected by the mother, but inside the Sanjiao. That eventually develops as an aspect of the body which one might say is an external shield against energies and various things that Chinese medicine takes very seriously. It's connected kind of in a Western medicine way. They're even believing it exists now, but from a Western medicine way, it's connected with the immune system. But anyway, we thought, and Laura's been very interested in the guy because she loves Bach. And since I introduced her to Glenn Gould, she's quite interested in him. And
you should see his movie.
There's lots of stuff available. But he was quite a phenomenon, but he got kind of burned out because it was just, he said, the traveling and the audiences and all this kind of stuff was just too much to deal with. Plus, he was very odd. He had this little old rickety chair that he liked to play in. And he sat extremely low to the piano. And he caused a famous ruckus between him and Bernstein with the performance of Beethoven. Bernstein came out and said,
a disclaimer.
This is not a mutually agreed upon realization. He was kind of famous. He had certain kind of odd ideas about tempi and things. I think the more that because what he did is he just started to be on his own, and the Canadians supported him. They gave him a TV show and a radio show, and he just started to work in the recording studio. And ultimately, I think, as far as I know, he eventually stopped performing with any other musicians. Just him. There is, interestingly, he died kind of young. I'm not exactly sure why, but I think the guy was just so sensitive and quite odd. He might have not taken the best care of himself, but he died in his mid-50s.
Something like that, not without releasing his last album.
And so what? He died in the 80s, right?
He did.
It was sometime, I think, after I finished at Wittenberg, but not long. But that's interesting because he went back into the recording studio in the later 70s and early 80s and started to re-record a lot of the Bach repertoire that he'd already done years before. And they're very interesting because you think they're like two different pianists.
They're
the interpretations. He completely rethought the music and things like that.
Well, he thought about the whole concept of recording. He called it a new. He said that recording is a new form of art. Which explains a lot why he did a lot of dubbing and replacing and splicing.
He was totally into that because what he was thinking was that a recorded performance was a singular artistic creation, much like, in the way, that a live performance, that time when you did it, that was that moment. That was it. That was the piece of art in that moment. That was that interpretation. But there wasn't necessarily a continuity of performances.
I'm not sure I totally agree with that, though.
Well, it was a good excuse because he just, if I don't like this part, I don't like that part, or anything. But, the guy, I think, was, he struck one when you talked to him. He was a very intellectual,
Yeah.
and very opinionated, and sometimes could be quite edgy.
Brass.
Yeah, about his opinions, and then even with the people who were interviewing or something. And I think I've known certain people like this. I think the man struggled with I think he struggled with perfection. That he really had this idea that it could be that perfect. That I wonder if the stress of all that isn't even part of what killed him. Because, I mean, the amazing thing when he did record something and it was on video or something like that, who knows how many times he did it.
Yeah.
But there was a mastery and a control, and also the musical and the mental parameters were so excellent, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, Horowitz wasn't perfect.
No, he wasn't.
I mean, Horowitz, you know, once in a while, I mean, as he got older and he played certain kind of repertoire that he played a lot and played it, and I'm sure he only released what was fabulous. I don't know. He didn't let anything go by.
Yeah.
But even so, when you see the famous Moscow Return, and that features in a film that Martha Argerich and two other lady piano colleagues of hers are watching Horowitz, and it's on YouTube. They're just commenting and just shaking their heads about the extraordinary, the connection between the purity of the movement and with already the preconceived musical idea and the sound that he would get, and the totally convincing rightness of what he did in a way that looked so effortless and so, and yet how did this sound, how did this movement make pow, and at the same time that sound did this sweet thing. I said, how did he do that? And of course I remember this guy, you said, do you know his name? Norman Krieger, who does this great video you can see on YouTube as well. He says, how did these different famous pianists play? The one thing that he said, which I thought was very interesting about Horowitz, the thing that he picked up on, I never thought about. But they always said one thing interesting about Horowitz is that, you know, he was probably closeted gay. Maybe he had some activity, who knows, but with wander around, God only knows. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way at all. But that he took pride in the fact that he maintained a very good state of physical health. People talked about him, that they'd seen him top up, and he had a really impressive physique. Never flabby.
Well, he had one point in his career where it didn't go so well. Where he was out of shape. When he did that concert over in Japan.
And it was not highly regarded.
And Wanda was out in the wings, and she was crying the whole thing.
It didn't go well.
It didn't go well.
But that was later on in his career, and I think he cleaned up his act after that.
He did.
But for a good period of time, he was in really excellent shape and aware of it. And you always heard his regular Sunday, every night, you know, everywhere, anywhere in the world where he lived, he had Dover sole, and whatever else with lemon and some other kind of thing. He was extremely fussy about his diet, his daily routines, and all that kind of thing. But the thing that Krieger pointed out, I'd never thought about, because I've also studied martial arts and I do Tai Chi. I'm not a big martial arts, but I do Tai Chi for myself, and I've taught it to some people. But it's this whole thing about the Dongdian and the belly being the center of the soul, or an aspect of the soul anyway, which is held where all of the power and all the strength comes from. And what Krieger points out is, he said, this central mass around the solar plexus in here, which is probably quite taut, and that he draws on the energy from that. And that's how he can make these sudden, like panther-like strikes on the piano, you know, with just a small motion, but clearly it's coming from a powerful source, you know. But why did we get into this? Why are we talking about this?
We were talking about Horowitz's playing and how Norman Krieger was able to.
But before that, what we were talking about, I wanted to try to go back into the conversation. I lost my train of thought.
Oh gosh!
You know what we were talking about?
Well, we were were talking about how he produced sounds and the kapow and the farther back. Oh.
Anyway, you guys know where we started.
Yeah.
Maybe hopefully there's a connection made.
Yeah,
but that sometimes happens to me.
Yeah, well, we were talking about Ravel's, Laval's.
Oh, that was it. And Gould.
Gould, yeah.
Glenn Gould. He, when he was young,
yeah,
and it was lucky for him that when he started to come out into public acclaim, Horowitz had retired from the stage.
Yep, he did.
I think 53. This was 12 years, 65 when he came back. And the Bach performance Goldberg Variations is 55.
Yeah.
And Glenn Gould was being called a new kind of Horowitz.
Oh, I heard it different. I heard he was called the Bobby Fischer of the piano, is what I heard.
Now, from my point
because he did everything different. It was just like Bobby Fischer playing chess.
Right.
You know, nobody had ever seen anybody like Bobby Fischer.
But I think in terms of the voices and the stuff that he brought out,
technique is different.
So different. I know it is, but I have seen this in writing that at the time people were saying, "Well, we've got another Horowitz here," and I always find it interesting that Horowitz seems to be the touchstone because when Stephen Huff won the Levin trip a long time ago, and I remember him responding in interviews to this. What do you feel when people? I don't know why I'm drinking this tea, backing up on me. What do you feel when people refer to you as another Horowitz?
And he said,
of course, he's diplomatic about it. He said, "Well, and British too." He said, "Well, it's certainly a compliment, but I think we're different pianists, different paths, different approaches." But you know, when he was that age and breaking into the big show, if anybody ever compared you to Horowitz, I mean, I think people still do that who remember him well enough.
Oh, yeah.
But now the touchstone seems to be Yuja Wang. Oh, he plays like with Yuja Wang, you know. She has that same kind of remarkable.
She has technique, but the ones that have come close to Horowitz, I think, is either Schifra, because he has that nervous quality about his playing, and perhaps even Volodos.
Yes.
Volodos, because the way he's able to change his tone as, you know, at a single dot.
Well, and then one more, and part of that great American generation, Byron Janis. I think when you hear his recordings, and this has been going on since yesterday, I can't remember this low down permanent hiccup thing going on. Maybe I'm not breathing deep enough. But Byron Janis studied with Horowitz. And there are times when you listen to those recordings from back then. I don't know if he chose a similar kind of piano, but definitely the sound, the sonority.
Yeah.
The Steinways are very unique.
Oh, yeah.
And he must have had an ear for picking one out. And then he had an ear for those sonorities. And he may have, I think he just got so used to the Horowitz sound that might have been part of what he did.
Yeah.
Even if he wasn't completely aware of it.
Yeah, there's a passage in one of his books where Byron Janis did talk about his, his lessons with Horowitz, where he said that he felt like he always had the sound, but the mannerism and the way he was phrasing, it was too much Horowitz.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was starting to wonder if he was losing his own identity.
Yes.
And he talked to his teacher, Rosina Levine, about it. You know, and he says, and she basically told him that she couldn't make that choice. Really, you should, it's your choice, whether you want to keep studying with him. And he did for a while. Not very many people know about this.
This is in the book that Duvall wrote, right?
I
Is
think
that
it
where
might
we
be.
get that story?
I think that's where I got the story.
Yeah.
It might have been from there or someplace else.
Yeah.
But not many people know about the contributions Byron Janis did. He actually discovered a few Chopin pieces during his time Horowitz that he got the premiere. He discovered a brand new nocturne, which was in C minor. It was posthumously published by him, basically. After he even discovered a few handful of the circus that he got to premiere as well. So his contribution is amazing. I mean, we wouldn't have this repertoire without him.
Just a brief mention about that. In addition to being, he was a phenomenon unto himself.
Oh, yeah.
I know, for example, my piano teacher, Ellsworth, he didn't like Horowitz. I mean, he respected him and what he could do.
What do you think of Byron Janis?
He hated this. He hated the sound which sounded aggressive.
Yeah.
Ellsworth would have loved Greg Johannessen's playing. He loved George Bollet's playing.
Yeah.
I loved it. Probably his preeminently favorite pianist was Claudio Arrau. There's a certain warmth and grandeur, and for Ellsworth, and his career, I want to say something about that. For Ellsworth, he was mostly his career for 25 years was built around contemporary and even avant-garde music. For example, that's how I met John Cage and Merce Cunningham, was because of Ellsworth. They both came to Madison when they did a big special Cage celebration. And Cage was right there. I mean, for that week, I had many times I got to hang out with him. That's for another time. There's some great stories. But I was going to say about Horowitz, like when he, I know he wasn't the first one to do it, because there were some pianists that played the music a little bit here and there. But when Horowitz came out with Clementi and Scarlatti, he's had certain, eventually it was about a particular half dozen of Scarlatti sonatas, which really became part of his repertoire. I mean, sometimes you'll see that group of sonatas as a section in his programs. But he was very interesting. I mean, fortunately, he made a blue coup fortune of money earlier on, and I don't know if he probably maybe even really needed to make some more money. Because I do know, I have a wonderful blue box set, you've looked at it before. Which was produced in the 1950s, shortly after he had retired. And I think there's, at least 5 albums in there, so there's a few. It's got things like the Chanson das Macabre.
His arrangement.
And I think there's a recording of Funerari that he did there. But there's some different things, but the booklet that comes with it is wonderful. It's a big, LP-sized booklet, and it has quite a nice essay in it. I don't know if the writer is actually Clifton Fadiman, who's a very important intellectual and scholar and writer. Did a lot of public work in the 50s and 60s with, what's his magazine called? Wisdom. And he was part of a movement which was trying to develop a kind of a educational approach that determined the great authors and the great the great proponents of and contributors to Western culture. But anyway, in the booklet, there are it's about Horowitz and some about his career, but it's more about being with Horowitz in his home and what a gentleman he is and how he's entertaining and so forth. But it's also looking at his art collection. And he had a substantial impressionist collection of paintings. He had L'Acrobat of Picasso, and there were some other ones that are featured in there. And I don't think they're colored. They got colored plates. But they're wonderful works, and there's one like where Horowitz is standing next to the fireplace in the room in a very elegant Horowitz-like pose with his perfect suit on and everything, and bow tie. And there's a comparison made between L'Acrobat, the acrobat of Picasso, and the acrobatic figure of Horowitz standing there underneath the painting. But I seem to remember that at some point he had to sell some, I don't know how many, but some works from his collection. It may have been that living in the home they did in Manhattan and the lifestyle and everything. He was off the stage for 12 years. He was still making recordings that were quite popular, but I seem to remember that there was something about some work that came up for auction, and it was out of the Horowitz collection. But the story was, anyway, when Horowitz was sitting with another pianist, I think it was Ivan Davis. Elmer's coming back, he can correct this. Who was it? Ivan Davis that Horowitz is sitting at the same cafe with?
Yep.
So Ivan Davis was this new young hot pianist.
He had just came off winning the gold medal at the Franz Liszt competition.
And he was sitting at a restaurant or cafe out on the sidewalk in New York, and all these young kids came over. Kids. They wanted his autograph and everything, and take pictures probably. And Horowitz, as it happens, was sitting at a table at the same terrace there, and nobody even recognized him. Yep.
And according to Ivan Davis, he was sitting there as he was signing out autographs. He was saying, "Fools, don't you know who's sitting next to me? Ask for his autograph. Please ask for his autograph." And not one of them did.
Not one of them did. And so Horowitz was obviously a little bit bothered by this.
Yeah.
And he just said he realized that over the time that he'd been absent, at least in terms, these were all active, classically interested, either students themselves of music or great followers of it, and they didn't know who he was. This phenomenon of the first half of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And so he made a decision at that point. He called up his manager, and some people conferred, and they agreed that he was going to jump back in.
Yeah.
He'd been making some recordings, as I told them.
Yeah.
In between that time, but my whole point in really bringing him up was he never had, and they said this in some book I was reading recently, that Horowitz didn't have a vast repertoire that he performed on, compared to some other people.
He used to.
He did have quite a number of things he did, but eventually as he got older, it became a little bit narrower and really quite perfected performances, really. But I think in those 12 years he did an enormous amount of study of pieces, because that whole album, I own it, of the Clementi sonatas came out, and the whole album of all just Scarlatti sonatas came out.
Have you read the trouble he had getting the record producers to let him do that?
Really? Let Horowitz do it?
Yeah, they had so much trouble trying to convince the producers this was the direction he wanted to go with as far as Clementi. Well, Clementi, and even today, he's still criticized as being the composer of sonatinas for students, right?
And something back, and yet he competed with Mozart in his own lifetime.
Yeah.
And they were held. Mozart, they decided. Let's put it this way: I think the judgment is that Clementi had an extraordinary technique.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But then kind of so did Mozart, but it's also much more musical and more interesting play.
Yeah.
So
basically it was a tie.
It was basically a tie. Yeah. That Clementi had the good sense to move over to London.
Yeah.
And eventually got a piano building and everything.
Oh yeah.
Made, again, a blue coup fortune.
Oh,
He was a very wealthy man when he died.
Yeah.
He did not end up in a pauper's grave.
Oh, no, he did not. No, he did well.
But I thought, Horowitz is probably... And what is it about, sometimes, the critics, they'd attack him for being a show-off,
Oh, the producers.
Playing too fast or doing this or doing some crazy, wacky shit. But is that just because, there is the Apollonian and the Dionysian schools of art, the formalism and the romanticism. And some people, are just guided towards those things because of their innate personality and what they like, what they don't like. They finally credited him with being the last romantic.
Yeah.
Maybe so, and he was kind of part of that kind of tradition, but he was attacked at times, and it's like, what is the 1930s version of the Grove Dictionary is famous for having said that Franz Liszt is he was a big show-off pianist, wrote a lot of music that nobody really wants to play. and then most of the stuff people do play is just super virtuoso garbage.
Yeah.
And then they totally trash
Rachmaninoff, I saw that. Yeah.
Those British musicologists, they had their opinions.
Yeah.
And I've got the 1980 version, and it's serious different interpretations of Franz Liszt and Rachmaninoff. Those articles are huge, and they all take it. Well, there had to have been in some way, a kind of. Well, Horowitz himself was competitive.
Oh yeah.
But there also had to have been just kind of sort of professional competitiveness from his own colleagues that just. I mean, what do you do? Well, let's put it this way: in this day and age, right now, this very day, now you, Joe Wang, can play like nobody's mother, all right?
Yeah.
And I love the way she plays. It's quite masculine, quite tiger-like, the way she can play big works and stuff. And she has a very powerful approach to the keyboard when she wants to play. Shapes things well, does lovely things. In a more intimate setting and more intellectually considered, I think Yun Chan Lim could give her a run for her money.
Oh, absolutely, he could.
Because he has that wizard aspect and the colors and everything, and an ear for something. Yeah. So she's more like the tiger, and he's more cat-like. He can make big sounds. He
could.
But he has, and they often refer to as Horowitz's more cat-like way of getting around the piano. Those kind of things where people are pandering cats because they don't like certain parts of that personality. But you can't underestimate the guy and his influence. Yeah. I was going to say to you, Joe Wang, she's interesting because I've heard her play the Stretch Polka.
Yeah.
What's his name?
Schiffer.
Yeah, it was Georgie Schiffer's own work. And if you guys don't know Georgie Schiffer, Cziffra.
You got to.
He was Hungarian.
He was Hungarian.
And he
has quite a story, too.
Child prodigy.
He
was he also?
Yes, he was. He was in a concentration camp for a number of years
because he was
his interrupted his career.
What's what they call them nowadays?
What?
Gypsies.
Gypsies?
They have an ethnic name for them. Pardon me, I forgot what they call them. Laura and I were talking about it just recently. But he was a gypsy.
Yeah. And
he kind of learned in that wonderful culture where the music is so much part of them. And they play, they learn to play the instruments and usually play them so wildly and so amazingly. There's some wonderful videos of Georgie Schiffer warming up. He's going to do
where he's improvising and stuff.
And it is crazy, wild acrobatic stuff. And one of the things he did do is there seems to be something common from Horowitz's time, and definitely during the Soviet time and all that. The big sound, huge, massive sound. It's one of the things people don't know. I hope I don't. Well, I'm not meaning to step on your toes about it, but admire the ability of. Did I say a while back? Not
Schiffer?
Russian yoga became a conductor.
Ashkenazi?
Yeah, Ashkenazi, for example. Yeah, boy could play, but I've got it, and I've got his complete Rachmaninoff Concerti and the Rhapsody. It's not the most pleasant thing to listen to. He tends to pick a steely sounding Steinway, if that's what they are, probably. Yeah. And he pounds. And sometimes I know the music may have been written with that in mind. There was as I'd said, Promethean, gargantuan kind of piano playing where you really had to have a huge sound. Rubinstein could have a massive sound.
He could.
If he wanted to. Fleischer can have a massive sound, but in his case, I don't think it's ever ugly. Yeah. It's really beautifully proportioned. And again, if you've never heard those Beethoven or Brahms Concerti, I remember one time reading about it, sometimes in the biographical notes about Fleischer. I forget who he was doing it with, but he was playing the orchestra reduction of one of the Brahms Concerti for a student colleague of his, who was also very famous. I don't remember who that guy was, but Fleischer was playing the orchestra.
Yeah.
And there were some written comments from the jury that they rarely heard the orchestra part played that well, even by an orchestra.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a loss for that poor man. He got that, was it dystonia or something?
I have absolutely no clue what
Something
happened.
in the hand where he couldn't control the tendons anymore. He had some surgery done, which worked for a while.
Yeah.
Nowadays, there was also a, what was it, Chilean pianist?
Oh, yeah.
Who was a great Bach player.
Yeah.
And he couldn't play for a long time.
Yeah, Carlo somebody.
You guys might know what we're talking about. And I saw something recently where he's the one.
Glove.
They have this glove which has computer stuff in it. And
Martin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it Martin or Martinez?
Martin.
He made a famous Carnegie Hall performance. And he's quite well known as a Bach player. I got some of his LPs.
Yeah. I remember you telling me about it.
Yeah, and he's now 80 or something like that, but he looks healthy. You know, looks like he's still.
But he's been through like a lot.
Well, and you know the
car accidents and stuff.
The reason that it happened more
big mug.
He was mugged. He was beaten on the head, and it created a permanent injury somehow.
Yeah.
Probably between the brain nerves and the hand.
Oh yeah.
And he wasn't able to do it, but to control it. But this guy, sympathetically because of him, who did robotic work and stuff like that, came up with a very fine-fitting glove. So it's not bulky, and it has kind of skeletal structure on it, which somehow feeds into him, and it reads the impulses, and he can play with it.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what level he's managed to get back to, but the guy was quite excited. He said for him emotionally, it was amazing, because he hadn't even felt like he could sit down and play in a self-satisfying way for a couple decades or so.
The fingertips are exposed.
Yes.
I remember looking at the pictures.
Yeah.
So that's quite amazing.
What do you think about AI sometime being able to replace all of us?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
Seeing all this crap about the conductors, the robot conductors doing stuff like that.
I do not know. I want to see that.
Really? I mean, you know, I've experienced some things with naive people and companies that I've worked for. There's a present situation which is kind of like that. I won't get into the names and the details. Some people will know what I'm talking about, but I'm not mentioning anything. Well, let's put it this way. There's a great masterful conductor who, when he sets his sights on something, the eventual result is memorable. The colors that he pulls out of the orchestra, the interpretation and stuff, it hits you in the heart. You can really feel it, you know. Some masterful interpretation and masterful technique that guides and leads the musicians to play in such a way that I've talked to some musicians just said, anytime I can play with this guy, I want to, because I've never had those kind of feelings with him.
What is this guy?
I'm not going to mention his name.
You're not going to mention his name?
No. But at the same time then,
how come you can't mention his name?
Because there's certain legal things involved.
Really?
Oh, yeah. So there's some other people that are thinking of going different directions sometimes, and they say, well, we could find this person a conductor, we'll get this new person and this and that. Well, yeah. I mean, what does it take to move a stick? I mean, some actors have learned to do it reasonably well in films. But that, again, that's like the kindergarten stuff, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, a really enormous conductor, the technique can be very different. And when you see them actually conducting live, sometimes they're hardly doing anything.
Yeah.
Sometimes if the orchestra gets going, they'll just let the stick rest for a minute.
Well, Richard Strauss was like that.
Some things like that. Very much a stick man. That was it. But there are these ineffable qualities that some people have the ability to engender trust in their fellow musicians and the ability to convince them, let's do this, let's try this, let's do what I'm thinking about, let's see if the energy expended isn't worth the ultimate artistic achievement. And I think that that's what the great leaders, the great conductors, that's what they all had in common.
Oh yeah.
Very different when you look at them. Totally different schools
Yeah.
of training, schools of thought. I recently, well, until the internet cut out, just yesterday, I think, for a while, I have a subscription. That's the other thing I want to say if I hadn't done so far. Digital Concert Hall, put out by the Berlin Philharmonic.
Yeah.
The subscription here in the States is like $16 a month. It is so totally worth it. They have an archive of working on now 800 performances.
Whew.
With all kinds of great artists and historically going back into the earlier 20th century. And they have films about famous conductors and various people. You can see the ones they have on Wilhelm Furtwängler, which are very interesting.
I like the one you did.
On Kleiber? Yeah, Eric.
Carlos.
Carlos Kleiber, yeah.
Oh,
one of the best.
Oh, it was
and
great.
then there's now chamber music concerts where various members of the Philharmonic and sometimes guests come in. There was a wonderful quartet thing I was watching with Ray Chin, who came as the first violinist, and then the other three guys in the quartet were members of the Berlin Philharmonic. Vibrant playing, wow! But I was watching it was called Music of America. That was the title, but it was a Berlin Philharmonic, and I mean, as I've been listening to the play, what an ensemble! What an incredible orchestra! Gustav Dudamel, the Venezuelan guy, who's going to take over New York in a couple of years, I think. He was the guest conductor, and the Music of America didn't feature one North American composer. They were all Central and South American composers.
Huh.
And that's not true. That's not true. And I didn't get through the whole program because the internet cut out.
Yeah.
There was a wonderful, wildly virtuosic piece, really required incredible rhythmic precision and cohesion. And Dudamel was cluing so fabulously, but sometimes just little small gestures. Of course, he'd worked out the hard stuff in rehearsal. But it was by a woman named Cristina Ortiz.
Yes.
And she was actually in the audience, and she came up. She was so happy, and I felt so happy for her. And I was in tears because the performance was, I'd say a bad word, but it was brilliant. It was a brilliant performance. The virtuosity was off the charts of this piece by Cristina Ortiz.
She composed
it? She composed it, not the pianist one. This was a woman, written by a woman named Cristina Ortiz.
Oh.
And they gave her flowers and stuff, and she was so happy and just kind of outside herself. Just, it was such a wonderful performance. And then he came back in, and they did the first piano concerto of Hinastera.
Oh, gosh.
With amazing pianist. I can't think of his name. He had a Russian first name, but didn't look very Hispanic with the second name. But the last piece actually was Charles Ives' Second Symphony.
Oh, what?
So I want to go back and watch that one again. But no, the interesting thing is that I've watched, like Daniel Barenboim. Daniel Barenboim could be a very quiet conductor, and very quiet in his face.
He's got some funny moments.
When this is an older man, probably he's a little more economical. But even when I saw him conducting the Fourth Bruckner Symphony as a younger man, and I have a recording of that with Chicago, but it's with a little older man now, but with the Berlin Philharmonic. He's remarkably conservative, but very effective, and pulls amazing things out of the orchestra. Yeah. So what is it? Because visually, it's not always obvious what's working. But the sensitive musicians, they get it. They know it. They got it. There's a great story, I'll shut up after this, about this, where this percussion guy, it's in one of the films about Wilhelm Furtwängler. Yeah. And he was very tall. He was tall. Yeah. From the waist down, but especially from the waist up. And he kind of tended to move his head and wave his hands and his arms in this kind of gangly kind of way. And, his kind of way of beating sometimes is like this. You'd almost think he has a palsy or something, the way he moves. There's clarity there in terms of what he wants and what he's doing. But what was happening was, I think it was probably Celibidache, who himself was a very remarkable conductor, especially later on when he conducted the Munich for so many years. But he, being a non-German and a non-Nazi, was the one who was allowed to conduct the Berlin Philharmonic. I think it was like 4 to 8 years, something like that. And I have recordings of him. Actually, I have the complete show of Doc, which includes all the historic albums.
Oh, yeah.
But then after that, I think, is when they finally got Funkaria in there. And but the interesting thing is whoever the conductor was, I don't know if it's meant to be cello. They don't mention it. He said there was a different conductor because he said at the time Fort Fingler was prevented from conducting.
Yeah.
So he lasted a while after that. It wasn't a long time.
Yeah. Well,
It was maybe a couple years or something. But then he'd gone to La Scala and made this wonderful recording of the Rain Down There with Kirsten Flagstaff.
Yeah.
And but he said that the guy said, you know, the orchestra was playing, and he said, you know, we were back in the original hall being cleaned up, so it's been a long time after the war. And he said, I was, you know, as this particular piece, he said, I had a lot of time just sitting and waiting till my moments come in. But, you know, we're all very glued in together as an ensemble. Have to be, you know, even in the rehearsal. As to, but he said, you know, they're playing very well. I guess after all, these are my brothers in the Berlin Philharmonic. But he said at some point, he said, as I was sitting there, he said, I began to realize the sound started to change. He said there was this more scintillating, almost it's like a golden hue that took over. And he said suddenly the sound of the players as an orchestra, he said it started with the strings, and then he said it spread to all the strings, and then suddenly everybody was playing, and he said there was something so wonderful and memorable, something memorable about it. And he said, what's happened here? And all the way across the auditorium, in one of the entrances into the orchestra floor, Fort Fingler was standing there in the doorway.
Oh, jeez.
And he said they saw him, and then people go nudge, you know, like that. And he said all of a sudden, he said, and it reminded me, he said, it sounded what I remembered. That's the way they played when Fort Fingler was conducting.
Wow.
The sound and the intensity and the purposefulness of it.
Yeah.
He said it was something very familiar, but a little bit past tense, a little bit. And he was just saying, it's in the film about that. That's the kind of authority and influence a great musician can have on a body of also great musicians who are sensitive and willing to submit themselves to that person's authority. And I've learned in my own experience through life, I'm pleased to work with a person who absolutely deserves the title maestro. What does it mean? It means master.
Yeah.
But it's like in the East, or even like in Turkey, and I wouldn't say, I mean, I deserved it in a certain kind of way. It doesn't carry for me quite the same way to what maestro means, but in Turkey, all the students would refer to me as hocam.
Which is...
And even people in the community, who then, if they learned I was a professor at the university, hocam. And it comes from the Islamic tradition of referring to the Muslim cleric as literally it means my teacher, like rabbi. In Jewish tradition, it's primarily, yes, he leads the people in the services and things like that. But his title and his authority in the community, and people were referred to with different words as teacher. That's what rabbi means. So it's teacher, and I was called hocam, which was it was nice to be honored that way. But it was kind of interesting to me when I was in a position where I had to take over relatively short term, with about 72 hours, and I had helped prepare a production of this 20th century work, but then the conductor had to step down, and he said, "You're going to have to do it." First performance opening night was Friday night, and I walked up on the podium Wednesday late morning and had Wednesday and some Thursday time, not with the singers so much, but with the orchestra to get it ready to open Friday night. And I'd never looked at the full score. I'd only worked for the reduction as the pianist helping prepare it. And it was not a simple score.
I know it's not. Oh, yeah.
You were part of that production in a larger aspect, but it was very strange all of a sudden when everybody, the singers, the orchestra people, and the administrative people, suddenly started calling me maestro. And I realized that, particularly making this thing happen, there's the pressure of the leadership. Because everybody always going to be looking to me for everything, And I got the importance of time, but I disabused them of something right away. I said, I've done a lot of conducting in my life. And I said, I've conducted some symphonies sometimes. And I played, as a soloist and conducted an orchestra and a concerto. And I've done a lot of choral conducting. But I said, to be honest, and I've worked in the opera world for a long time, but no one's ever given me the stick, and this is the very first time I've ever stood up on a podium with this kind of responsibility, so please forgive me. And everybody applauded. Enthusiastically, and to encourage me. And it felt wonderful because the whole short time process, and I made them aware. I said, look, whatever cue you need here or there, if I don't give it to you, we'll stop and remind me I'll write it in the score. Because we don't have a lot of time to waste here. If there's a problem, we're going to go tick, tick, tick. If a hand goes up, tick, 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 let's stop and deal with it. Right? Because it's more important to make sure that we're all as congealed as possible. And we did that a few times. The orchestra was very supportive and very helpful about suggesting things. We need this right here. And how are you going to conduct that part right there? And things like that. And we got it all worked out. I basically didn't sleep for 72 hours. When I wasn't there, I was here at this table.
Remember the whole thing.
Eraser, writing it all out. We had a pretty good show. Actually, one fellow who knew our productions and stuff, he came up after Friday night and said, you guys did this several years ago. He said, I think this production was better than the earlier one. Bravo. Good job. Anyway, what I was just saying about with the title Maestro. And for example, the person I'm thinking of has a traditional European background in his musical preparation, conservatory stuff. Because until very recently, the Europeans don't even have doctorates in music. The musicologists would, maybe the theorists, but only very, very, very recently has the concept of a doctorate of performance been introduced into some places. Because they still go by the old idea. You study with a master teacher. That's what goes on your resume. I studied with Wilhelm Kempf, Well, that means if he took you on as a student, you must be pretty hot shit. And then coming out after working with him, you better be, or you're going to be quickly forgotten. There's a lot of pressure that way. But whether it is, doctors are trained in a way in this country because, we're more concerned about quality from the foundation up. And I think, let's put it this way. If you buy an American car that was built through the 60s, maybe even mid-70s, and we can still see him. I was going down 71 today, and there's a guy in a early 50s Cadillac with 4 guys in it. Looked almost like something out of The Sopranos. It was a bird's, robin's egg blue color. It was as quiet as a Tesla. And they weren't going fast enough for him. He sped up, took off down the left lane. America in general, when it gets to look at our space race stuff that we built, things like that. We build quality. or that's many times in most industries what we're known for, you know. But definitely in the car industry, those monsters, if maybe they get a little rust, you have to fix them up, put a new engine or something like that. They're still running decades later, you know. And I think in general, because I think the role of law and the frequency of lawsuits in our country causes us to be more deeply aware of and concerned about all the little parts of things that lead towards integrity and quality. You know, so the idea really is, if someone gets through a doctoral program in music, you got to know your crap.
Oh yeah.
You know, you got to need a lot of stuff, and I'm proud of the fact that I got my doctorate, and in fact that still in this day and age, I mean, there are way too many of us, but for the jobs that are available, but I'm proud of what I went through. I mean, serious hazing and really hard stuff.
Yeah.
Because a professor is almost like hazing more than anything else. You get to a point, they know you know your stuff, probably. But then what they're doing is they're looking for what you don't know, just to make sure your head isn't too full of bullshit. Because, you know, some people, well, as you begin to learn, the doctorate, like Jeffrey Sykes said to me, he's a wonderful colleague, wonderful pianist. He got his doctorate at Madison. He said one time when I told him, I said, well, it must be, I was naive. I'd just finished my master's and he was coming in and started his doctorate there. I said, well, it must be nice to be getting close to the conclusion of your education. He looked at me with a kind of look, and he looked at me and said, you know, actually, yeah, you know, there's the bachelor's and the master's, but he said, I kind of feel like I'm just really beginning to enter the realm, you know, of real stuff, meat and potatoes work. Yeah. And what you're mostly taught, I think, which is important in the doctorate, are the tools that you need to be on a desert island and do your own work, your own research, figure things out for yourself, but to do it in a scientific-oriented method where you understand procedures that you take to, you know, validate the information that you have. You have to present it to your colleagues and argue your points with them and so forth. If you're lucky, maybe it gets printed, maybe it gets turned into a book. If you're really lucky, it becomes the new way that you understand those things, you know, the new thought. But what I learned in my doctorate was, well, these things I'm pretty good at. These things I'm good. And I know a lot about this and this and this and this. Over the years, though, I've got to know even better about other things because I've researched them, I've studied them, I've practiced music and learned it. And I've been able to do that because I had such really good training, I think. And I think when a person gets the title maestro, they have come to deserve it because they went through a similar process, but more in the performance arena. Like Bruno Walter. You know, Bruno Walter, I don't know if he ever received one per se, but when he was older in the interviews, everybody called him Dr. Walter.
Yeah.
Dr. Walter. Or Doctor.
Yeah.
That's the question in the interview. I don't know if he ever was recognized really by anybody with that honorary doctorate. Yeah. But he was beyond maestro. I mean, he was Dr. Walter. And that's too European. And that's because, but the man, as I said, he started out as a pianist, became a repetiteur and a coach at the opera house, got to use the stick a few times, impressed people enough. He eventually got to lead the opera. And then beyond that, finally got into the symphonic world. And then what did he record or direct where people just didn't think he was extraordinary? You know, but over the time in his lifetime, he gained the well-earned reputation as a maestro and a doctor. And the wonderful things are, and you read things about the musicians who were pulled together to make the Columbia Symphony Orchestra were pulled out of Los Angeles because he lived in Beverly Hills. And they made an orchestra for him out of all those gifted musicians, many of whom played for the films in LA. They created this orchestra, and the big project that he had for them was when he wanted to start recording some of the Mahler symphonies, some of which he'd done. Like there's a famous fourth symphony recording in the New York Philharmonic from back in the 30s, I think, that he did. Maybe it was in the 40s, late 40s, it's after the war was over. But the problem he said he had was back in the day, this was the 60s, think, when he was doing this. He said Americans just had no clue about Mahler, really. He said,
No, we did.
he said, no, there was nothing, everything cultural and in Mahler's language as a musician. He said they just didn't get it, you know. He said that you could eventually get him to play pretty good Brahms over time.
Yeah.
And of course they did Beethoven. They said the earlier classical stuff, fabulous.
Yeah.
Later, in his mind, no. And by the time you get to Mahler, forget Strauss for a while. But the really cool thing is in those releases that they did on CD of not just the final recordings, but some of the rehearsals that he did with them.
Exactly.
Where he's talking and teaching them.
Yeah.
Or you hear him rehearsing. And like there's a famous one where the what is it called? But the dance movement is the second movement of the Ninth Symphony. Da 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 dum, bum, da 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 dum, bum,
Yeah.
dum, bum, so they play it da 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 dum, da 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 dum, which you would often do. Ya da 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 two, bum 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 bum. Let's see, ya da 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 dum. I think it's probably like that in three. With the let's see, yada da da da, but it might be yada da da da, bum, ba da 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 da, or it could be yada da da da, bum, on the second beat, because you know the Viennese are big for second beats in the waltz.
Right.
Well, and these dances, this is the Lindler actually, and he explains to them what the origins are and who the people were. He said this is not an elegant dance. He said, you imagine the old peasants, the old farmers coming in, and they're having a party in the restaurant, you know, or something like that. And you got the older ones there, you know, they don't move so fast. And, you know, they're a bit clod hoppy because they're older now, but they're also farmers. You know, the brain has not been developed at this high level of, you know, really posh life and posh this. He said, they're peasants. And he said, that's not to look down on them, but to recognize the wonder of what they are. And he sings to them because they start, da-da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-dum, dum, almost rushing that last beat, and it's soft, like it would be if it were a second beat. Bum, 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 da, 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 dum, bum. Going to the first, he said, no. And he sings to them. Yeah. And he goes, da 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 dum, bum, da, da, and not that vulgar, but ya da 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 dum, bum, da 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 dum, bum. And then especially when is it the oboe or the horn or whatever? Yeah. Clarinet as well. Dum, ya, dum, ya, dum, ya, dum, bum, 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 bum. And it's like if you imagine in The Labyrinth, those little creatures that hang out with Jennifer Connelly and stuff, if they were all to have like a big party dancing together, all these little creatures. And that's the kind of music that those Muppet creatures would dance to. And then finally, when they really record it, it's wonderful. Da-da-da-da-dum. Introduction, ya-da-da-da-dum, bum, bum, bri-ya-dum. That's like, bum, bri-ya-dum, bum, bri-ya-dum, bum, bri-ya-dum, bum, 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 bri-ya-dum, bum, bum! You know, the whole orchestra comes in. And it's interesting, because Walter worked with Mahler. Yeah. And after Mahler died a bit prematurely, he was sick in New York, came back and died as soon as he got back. Walter had a special concert. Can you imagine this? They created this huge place to perform. They did the 8th and the 9th symphonies and Das Lied von der Erde as a memorial to him. And the 9th symphony, anyway, was the very first, I believe it was the very first world premiere of the 9th symphony. Wow. That he had studied very carefully with Mahler. And the amazing thing is, again, where we were talking even earlier, how America prospered by having all these brilliant, many times Jewish, Walter was Jewish. I forget what his original birth name was, but I think it was something Berg or something like that. Yeah. But he changed it probably for those very reasons, maybe earlier on in Germany. But what's so amazing is that he worked as a young man, as a student with Gustav Mahler. And part of his ability to start to conduct was Mahler said, this boy's got some talent. This boy was probably like Liv's age. Yeah. this boy might end up doing something. And it's Mahler that said that. So it's like if Leonard Bernstein said, yeah, this lady, this, what's her name?
Marin Alsop.
This is Marin Alsop. You might want to keep an eye on this one. She is a great conductor. People are just on her ass all the time. Yeah. She's a female, But I think she does very great work. But anyway, the extraordinary thing is that he knew Mahler. He knew the music. He lived it. He knew the culture in Vienna. He knew the mountains outside and the terrain where Mahler's from, where he's buried. They have that wonderful young green wine that they get drunk on in the spring and summertime. Grüne Veltliner, they call it. And the dance and the music that's so common there. And it ends up as an old man training a lot of Jewish musicians in Southern California who went out there and played in those orchestras for the film industry. A tremendous amount of Jewish talent out in Southern California in Hollywood. And they created an orchestra for him, pulled from these very people who really, because of where they were born and what they were raised in, had no cultural connection with any of that. And he teaches them to play it like it was meant to be played. And when they asked him in interviews, so this whole project of doing the Mahler with your symphony, I remember seeing it one time. How do you feel about that? How's it going here? How did it go? He said, I was enormously satisfied and enormously impressed and personally so moved by these American musicians who knew nothing about it. And yet, he said, this is the wonderful thing about these American musicians. He said, they just soak this stuff up like a dry sponge, and that they hunger for really fine music, and they want to do it well. And he said, and they did. He said, I can stand by these recordings as some of the finest interpretations I've ever been able to do of the maestro's work. And I didn't know why I started talking about that, but anyway, I guess we're still talking.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I enjoy doing this so much, people.
Oh, yeah.
Because this guy has always been very patient with me, because he, for a while recently, is my only piano student. And we got started that way, and then we both realized that we have so much in common in terms of our backgrounds and what we love and what we're passionate about.
Oh, yeah.
And how he knows plenty of stuff that I don't know about. There's certain areas, he's totally into the competition knowledge. He knows all the pianists and everything right up to the very recent stuff. I don't tend to pay much attention to that anymore, but between the two of us, I think we have a really strong
very much
connected knowledge and everything. And he loves to talk. I love to talk. I think he lets me talk more because he's being respectful and kind. Sometimes I have to shut up and just let Albert talk, because he has a lot of great stuff to say too.
I mean, there'll be more. There's plenty more.
Oh heavens!
Oh gosh! Wait till you see some of the stuff.
Probably didn't get to what you were planning on doing this time, right?
What thing?
But I imagine we went a long way over. We're trying to do. Well, it's 5 o'clock, and we probably started at 3:40. No, it was 1:40.
It was about
1:40.
So
2:40, 3:40. 4:40. It's 3 hours.
3 hours.
Okay, we better start putting it to bed, people.
Yeah.
We're generally we've not been able to keep ourselves at 2 hours.
Yeah.
And if you happen to comment to us and say, "Well, you guys keep it shorter," my suggestion would be like today's show. Turn it off when you've had enough and come back and watch the rest later.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So much more to tell.
Because we'll see, maybe if people start saying, well, you guys are interesting, but not that interesting. Why don't you cut out something?
Oh, gosh.
We get rolling and we get going. So I'm sorry if we talked so much, but I liked what we talked about.
Oh, I like what we talked about too, especially like just going through history and
Yeah.
stuff.
Well,
gosh.
Elmer has a good suggestion, which I think we should stick to for the next show.
What is it?
Your guests at
the top 10?
Yeah.
Oh, the top 10.
And if we haven't told them about, tell them what that's going to be.
Okay. Maybe some of you remember from the last time or sometime in our past that we talked about.
No, we never released those shows.
We never did?
No, those haven't been released.
Oh, God.
We have a bunch of things that managed to survive. We have been trying to do shows since late February, and this is August of 2023.
Gosh.
But we are total idiots when it comes to computer stuff, listening, more or less. And so we've managed to figure this thing out with the camera, and we have a wonderful young lady who's editing things for us and helping upload stuff to YouTube, which will very soon begin to happen. So I don't think they do know about it.
Okay, all right. If you were going to throw your birthday party in the future or soon, maybe this year, and we had all of our composers still alive, name your top 10 composers you would like to invite to your party and why.
Is your list going to still be the same, or will it change?
No, my list is still the same. My list was interesting.
We went through this a few months ago.
Yeah.
And they were really quite interesting. But I'm looking to do this again. Because Elmer has a very interesting selection of people. And it actually made me come up with 2 different lists.
Yeah.
Mine had to do with, from a philosophical and traditional artistic separating views like Apollonian versus Dionysian.
Yeah.
A group of 10 guys who would pretty much oppose each other, and I would love to just sit and listen to the arguments. And then the other one was if I wanted we're all kind of in the same boat about stuff. 10 guys where I'd like to participate as maybe an equal participant in the conversation. But with the 5 big guns on either side, I just stand aside and let them talk.
Intellectual pursuits.
Yeah.
Mine.
I was going to say, we'll promise we'll play something on the piano sometime.
Yeah.
We've got all kinds of plans for things about looking at methods of piano teaching and piano study, addressing things. And then we figure after we get loaded up, there's going to be at the end of each show our Facebook page, which is your way of participating in the PSI community. If you have any suggestions for topics we might look at, or you can always write in, if we forgot somebody's name or said something wrong. You can always fill in those kind of things. However you'd like to participate, that'd be great. Just don't do anything where we feel compelled to block you.
I don't know, that might be the interesting part.
It could be. I just don't want it to turn into some of the conversations that go on in slip disc. I'm sorry, but
just be nice to each other.
I'll put it this way: those are bitchy people who just enjoy having bitchy arguments with other bitches. And
just be nice to each other. Okay.
Just
be nice.
Let's make this a good community of people who are fundamentally excited about piano and music and want to share things. And we're not going to probably do any live call-in or participation stuff, but not anytime soon.
Oh, you never know.
Well, that takes a kind of knowledge and stuff. We'll wait until enough of you subscribe that we can hire a professional crew to take care of this thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay? But in the meantime, you can look us up on Facebook. It's Marc and Elmer's PSI, Piano Seed Investigations. And you'll see that printed on the end credits. So I suppose that's it for now, right? Till next time.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I'm Elmer.
I'm Marc, and this is
PSI, Piano Seeds Investigations.
See you, folks.
Later.